All right. Good evening. Look at this full house. Love it. Welcome. Let's call this meeting to order at 5 p.m. and do the flag salute. Tim Cook, would you help lead us in the flag salute, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind, I'm so sorry. If you wouldn't mind just standing one more time so that we can do an invocation this evening. I went out of order, sorry.
No, you're good. I'm assuming I get to do that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Please join me. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this blessed evening, Lord. Thank you that we get to come together as a community and govern, but more importantly, we get to make decisions that impact the lives of Canyon Lakers. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you that we got to see this weekend a community come together over 9/11 and honor the ones that we lost, Lord. Thank you that we were united together as a community and that we continue to do that. Help us and guide us tonight as we make a very important decision for our community, and let us and help us make sound decisions in what we do, Lord. And in all things, let us be honoring of you. And in your name, amen.
All right. Madam Clerk, can we please do the roll call?
Councilmember Dane.
Here.
Councilmember Green.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Welty.
Here.
Mayor Castillo.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager, are there any changes to the agenda this evening?
No changes, thank you.
Okay, I need a motion and a second to approve the agenda, please.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Councilmember Dane.
Aye.
Councilmember Green.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Welty.
Aye.
Mayor Castillo.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay, moving right along. We have 3 business items this evening. Starting on number 1 is a resolution, adoption of Resolution 2021-46. Hi. Hi, Mike.
Hi. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. Tonight, staff is bringing forward a resolution to adopt resolution number 2021-46, awarding a contract to Aerethane Foam Products Incorporated for the roof rehabilitation project. This has been a project with regards to the new building that the city owns at 3054042 Railroad Canyon Road in the town center. Excuse me. On August 30th, we had bids that we received and we revealed for the project. Basically, the project consisted of repairs to the existing roof, which we've determined some time ago that needed immediate attention. So we put out the bid, we got 4 responses, and city staff is recommending the council authorize award the contract to Aerethane Foam Products for the bid. In addition to, we ask that council also approve a contingency for any unforeseen costs that could be determined later on. Questions?
Madam Mayor, if I may just add, this has been a long time coming. We haven't been shy about the fact that we've really struggled to find contractors that are able to do this work. You know, as a city, we have to pay prevailing wage, and we have to have qualified prevailing wage contractors. And we went out to bid on this project once before, and the proposals came in much, much, much higher than we were prepared for. And so we really, Mike Borja and our economic development consultant, Bill Blankenship, have put in hours and hours and hours and hours of work, narrowing down the scope of work, reaching out to consultants and contractors to put in proposals. And so we're pretty excited that we're at this point. We have a good company that came in with a proposal that's within our budget. And so we're looking forward to moving forward on this work.
This is considerably the lowest bid by far. It looks like $71,000 difference from the highest bid?
That's correct.
Okay. Council have any questions to staff?
Yes.
Okay.
Mike, the
Yes.
scope of work that you put out for this contract, they all bid on what you scoped?
That's correct, yeah.
And quality of product and everything? And so this company is at that bid?
Yeah, the scope of work was pretty descriptive, so it laid out everything that, that the roof needs. But
Okay.
obviously, because of potentially other things that we could find, that's why we had to include the contingency as well.
Okay,
just
that's
to
fine.
Make sure. We do have an approved budget already for this. This was part of the approved budget for 2021. For the building, I think we had somewhere around 100,000, so we're well under that expenditure.
Madam Mayor, if I may, CBG funds, have we utilized them for ADA use?
We will be.
Okay, is this going to go kind of in line with,
With the same building, that's correct. So we're going to be going out to bid hopefully next week. Actually, next week. We're going to go out to bid next week. CDBG requires, it's a little bit different than your standard bidding requirements because it's federal fund, low income driven. So we're kind of, I'm following all county guidelines when it comes to that. Specific postings for publications that you have to do, postings at the buildings that you have to let people know that it's actually a CDBG funded project. So all that's going to be as part of that. So yes, that project is a little bit different. It involves sidewalk, drainage, entryways,
that's my next question.
bathrooms.
So it's going to take care of that drainage issue that we have in the front, where
Yes.
everything's sloping into the building?
Yes, because it's all not ADA compliant at this time.
So is that not part of this bid then? This
It
is just going to
isn't.
be roof?
It isn't. It's completely different. The roof, unfortunately, you can't use CDBG money for
Right.
that. So the best thing to do, and it was recommended by county, that we separate anything that was CDBG funded related versus anything else that the city would go out to bid. So that's why we're going to do these as two separate projects.
Has the contractors discussed, being able to prevent the golf balls obviously hitting, which is causing the problems, which is the predicament we're in right now? Has there been a solution for that?
There has been. So one of the things that we required for that is specific roofing tile that's going to prevent any golf balls that hit that roof cause any damage, which
Oh, so this doesn't include golf lessons for our golfers here in
It
Canyon
does
Lake?
not, no.
Got it.
No.
Okay. That's what I was really hoping for.
But we should put a sign on hole 6 that says, "Don't aim for the building."
Yeah, but that's the fun part.
That's a shortcut.
Yeah.
It is. It's a shortcut, and unfortunately, a lot of people try it and they hit the roof.
Unsuccessful.
And yeah.
Yeah. We're just trying to hit your office, Mike. That's all it is. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Walty, do you have any questions?
No, just thank you guys for your work. I know it took a long time to work the bid down to something that is somewhat reasonable, so I appreciate it, because I know it's been a long journey and a lot of work. Thank you.
It has, yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dane, anything?
No, nothing else.
Okay, thank you. Are there any public comment cards on this item?
No comments.
Okay. I need a motion and a second to approve Resolution 2021-46, please.
So moved. I'll second it.
Okay. Did you get that? Okay, roll call vote.
Councilmember Dane?
Aye.
Councilmember Green?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith?
Aye.
Councilmember Welty?
Aye.
Mayor Castillo?
Aye.
Motion carried to adopt resolution number 2021-46.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to business item number 2, we have resolutions agreements with the State of California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, CAL FIRE. Hello, Chief.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, city staff, Jeff Latendish, your interim fire chief. Tonight I have just one item before you, so hopefully I'll try to be quick with it. As you know, when we started with the fire department and we were working on the budget process, we put over $700,000 aside for startup costs and for capital improvements. While that was a tremendous amount of money, and it's going to provide us all the tools and equipment we need to get the fire department up and running so that on January 1st, 2022, we'll be ready to respond, it didn't include everything that we were looking for. So the fire department's always trying to be creative in how we can find interesting and different ways of getting additional funding. As you're well aware, we were able to get a $30,000 grant through Firehouse Subs that we're receiving the equipment on. In addition to that, we've applied for Assistance to Firefighters grant through FEMA, and so we're always looking for opportunities to increase our funding. We came across an opportunity that is sponsored through the California Department of Forestry, and it actually deals with surplus government property from the Department of Defense and the United States Forest Service. And so CAL FIRE manages these two programs. And so one of the programs actually is for firefighting equipment, for firefighting vehicles and tools and so forth. And you can get this equipment for free. All you have to do is provide the transportation to and from to pick up the equipment. You're able to evaluate it, see if it's serviceable, see if it's something you want. It is surplus, so it has been used, but there's no cost to the agency. If, however, we were to pick up a vehicle and it's painted green for like the Forest Service or some military color, we would have to, what they call demilitarize it and paint it a different color, and we would probably want to do that to match our fleet anyways. The second program is more specifically for wildland response and for small community areas. The Riverside County Fire Chief has approved the city of Canyon Lake to be a participant in these two programs and has signed off, and that document has been forwarded up to CAL FIRE. So I'm here before you tonight asking for your support in approving resolutions number 202147 and 202148 so that the city can participate in these two federal surplus grant programs. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
I know you have a question.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do. I understand this one, but is this also with the state surplus? Is this a state surplus inventory that we can access?
From my understanding, the way I read through the two different agreements, this is all federal property, either from the Department of Defense or the United States Forest Service.
Okay.
I'm still looking into any state surplus equipment that we can get.
Sure. Because they do have state surplus lots, and they're located regionally, so you never know what you're going to get until you have to go look, but it is a good access because it's also a way of us piggybacking on some other things that we may not want to pay the full price on.
Yeah, full price or no price is my way of looking at it.
That is
So all of
correct.
these are no price again, other than bringing the equipment back to us. And with the computer age now, we're able to screen it very effectively and get a good determination of its serviceability.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dane, any questions?
Just do you have any idea how many pieces of equipment are available?
There's actually a lot. I was meeting with the fire chief from the Idlewild Fire Protection District, and they've received 2 vehicles that they're using in their fleet. And that's something that personally I'm looking for, is a pickup truck for the fire department. You know, just about every fire department has a pickup truck. The Code Enforcement Division has one, and so we're looking for one. But they do surplus out a lot of equipment that becomes available for smaller agencies.
Okay. Councilmember Welty?
Again, thank the chief for digging deep and finding us some opportunities to save some money.
Thank you.
Anything from you?
Chief, I just want to say thanks again for taking the time, to meet with the community on Thursday, partnering with the chambers. That was, a very popular event. We appreciate you doing that. And once again, you've definitely done the work on finding anything and everything that we can as far as grants. So I do appreciate the hard work on that. Very positive stuff coming from the community and all your efforts. So thank you. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
I echo those sentiments. Anything in terms of public comment card on this?
No comments.
Okay. Based on that, I would need a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 2021-47 and 2021-48.
So moved.
Second?
Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Dane?
Aye.
Councilmember Green?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith?
Aye.
Councilmember Welty?
Aye.
Mayor Castillo?
Aye.
Motion carried to adopt resolutions number 2021-47 and 2021-48.
Thank you. Moving on to our final business item of the evening, we have an ordinance. This is an introduction and first reading of ordinance 215. City Manager?
Yes, Madam Mayor, thank you. We have quite a bit of information to share with the council and with the public today. We have a number of consultants with us today to present kind of the work that the staff and the consultants have been doing over the past, more than a year now. But I'd like to start with just a little bit of a history of how we got to where we are today. Ordinance number 176 was adopted in November of 2017, prohibiting all commercial cannabis activities in the city of Canyon Lake. So that has been the policy of the city, and is the policy of the city today. In June of 2019, the city received a request from a resident to consider amending Section 9.03.030 of the Canyon Lake Municipal Code prohibiting commercial cannabis in the city. At the September 4th, 2019 council meeting, in response to public comment made by that same resident, then Mayor Jordan Ehrenkranz appointed an ad hoc committee to explore the issue. Given that 53% of Canyon Lakers casting votes in the November 2016 election voted in favor of Proposition 64, which legalized recreational marijuana in California, the ad hoc committee expressed the desire to proceed with evaluating whether or not the retail sale of cannabis might make sense in Canyon Lake, particularly in light of the city's need to identify additional sources of revenue. The consulting firm HDL, which for many years has served as the city's sales tax consultant, also happens to have extensive experience helping cities navigate the commercial cannabis industry. The city contracted with HDL in April of 2020 for subject matter expertise and technical support to develop a draft cannabis regulatory ordinance and to create an application process by which to evaluate and rank potential permittees. Should the city council ultimately vote to amend the municipal code to allow commercial cannabis, it's anticipated that only 1 or 2 dispensaries would be permitted and that a rigorous application and interview process would be conducted to identify only operations that would fit well within the community and be operated to a certain standard. HDL would help the city through that process and then conduct quarterly regulatory compliance inspections and annual revenue audits of any cannabis business operating within the city. In early March of 2020, the city retained Probolsky Research to conduct a public opinion survey pertaining to commercial cannabis in Canyon Lake. The plan was to have the polling firm present the results at the April 1st, 2020 City Council meeting. Unfortunately, COVID-19 restrictions went into place prior to that meeting, and the principals of the polling firm quarantined. The decision was made at the time to hold off on bringing the cannabis issue to the City Council until we got past the COVID restrictions and could once again welcome the public into the council chambers. At the time, none of us could have predicted how long the pandemic would drag on. At the City Council meeting on October 7th, 2020, the council directed staff to continue holding off on bringing the cannabis issue to the council until the public could safely and legally participate in the discussion in person. As the city's exploration and consideration of amending Municipal Code Section 9.03.030 is at the request of potential applicants, those interested potential applicants and not the city should incur the related costs. In order to accomplish this, interested potential applicants were invited to enter into credit and reimbursement agreements with the city. Through these agreements, interested potential applicants deposit funds with the city. The city then draws from these funds to pay for related expenses. In this case, expenses include HDL's fees, the cost of the survey that was conducted by Probolsky Research, and any time spent by the city attorney on this matter. Unexpended funds are to be refunded equally to those who have placed deposits. As COVID-19 regulations no longer limit occupancy within the council chambers, at the July 7th, 2021 City Council meeting, staff sought direction from the City Council on how the council would like to proceed. After significant discussion, the council continued the item to September and directed staff to move forward on a more thorough examination of the issue and to bring back additional information. The city attorney, the city's consultants at HDL, the city manager, have all worked together on a draft ordinance to repeal and replace Chapter 9.03. Contained in this ordinance is a proposed procedure for accepting and evaluating applications from those interested in opening a cannabis dispensary. The goal of the ordinance would be to allow for a limited number of cannabis dispensaries, the exact number to be determined at a council resolution at a future meeting, operated by vetted professionals in a manner that preserves or enhances public safety, is consistent with the look and feel of the surrounding area, and maximizes benefits to the community. At tonight's meeting, Probolsky Research will present the council with the methodology and results of the public opinion survey that was conducted in March of 2020. Riverside County Sheriff's Department will then present statistics and give input from a law enforcement perspective based on their experiences in other jurisdictions where cannabis dispensaries exist. The city attorney will introduce the draft ordinance, including the proposed application procedure. HDL will discuss how they envision the scoring of applications working and will provide some projections of revenue that could be generated for the city by a cannabis dispensary. The public will also be given an opportunity to provide input to the council. Finally, the city council will be asked to have a discussion and to consider the introduction and first reading of ordinance number 215. Should significant changes be requested of the draft ordinance, staff will have to go back and work on those changes and bring it back for first reading at a future meeting. Otherwise, tonight's meeting could count as the first reading of that ordinance. So with that, I would like to begin the presentations. I'd like to invite Adam Probolski of Probolski Research to come to the podium.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, City Manager. Adam Probolski, Probolski Research. My firm does opinion research, market research for government agencies throughout the country, but mostly here in California, specifically on taxation and also on cannabis. Our cannabis clients include the city of Coachella and the city of Huntington Park, and of course we do work for pretty much every agency surrounding us, Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District to City of Fontana and a whole bunch of others all throughout the state. We conducted a survey that was several months ago, as Chris explained, but we expect the results to be quite similar if they would be taken today. And so we're happy to present those numbers to you. I will go into first our methodology, which is a lot of words. Sorry about that. It was a very robust survey for a city of your size. Typically, in any political subdivision, you might have 300 completed surveys, 300 participants. So we're talking about county-wide. You would typically do 300. So having 300 in the city is very robust. Similarly, statewide, 900 is very predictive of outcomes, so 300 in Canyon Lake is very good. We conducted this survey both online and by telephone, so basically meeting voters where they are, where they're comfortable. Most people prefer to respond online, some people on the telephone, in fact, some people on landlines, most people obviously on mobiles that we talk to. And then we emailed them and texted them to bring them into the online experience. They were able to choose Spanish or English as their preferred language, and 4% of your voters chose Spanish. It doesn't mean they're the only ones that speak Spanish. It doesn't mean that the others don't speak Spanish. It's just their preferred language. That's all. And so very robust, very predictive, very accurate, typical scenario for any government work we would do, any government survey we would do. So first off, we asked the question of right track or wrong track for the city, and the right track outweighs wrong track. And I'll point out this is not an academic exercise, right? Our job is not to get 90% and get an A in class, right? Our job is to, and because we're Americans, we don't agree by that magnitude on anything. Having more people who say you're on the right track than the wrong track is quite impressive in today's environment with government. You have basically 2-to-1 right track numbers. It's very good. I will say this throughout the survey, the people who are unsure, we don't want to dismiss them. Obviously, we don't want to dismiss people who are unhappy, but also the unsure, they're just not connected to this place, right? I go to work, my kid plays soccer, I play golf, I go on vacation, whatever I'm doing, I'm just not connected to City Hall, and that's okay. They're just not aware of what's happening here. That's kind of part of the outreach process. We gave them a list, all your voters, a list of what they want you all to prioritize at City Hall. And they were able to choose as many as they wanted, and this is how it fell out. Number one was protecting water quality in the lake, and then reducing traffic, and then improving financial stability for the city, and it kind of goes down from there. This was tops concerned on their list of the possible things that you might focus on, and you may add some other thing to the list, but essentially you can clearly see that the lake is what they care about. But other things like traffic are very high on their concern level as well. So this week, you might call homework, right? To tick each of these off as well as you could to address these concerns. So we asked the question, getting right into the substance of the reason, one of the reasons for the survey, and that is the option of potentially bringing cannabis sales to the city. And you have initially opposition outweighing support. So the initial response to the idea of cannabis sales is plurality say no. And this is, a great starting place, right? And we then, and by the way, you also have a big group say, 14% say it doesn't make a difference to them. It's not important to them. So you put those together with some unsure, and you potentially have a majority who would potentially be supportive if you had a conversation with them. And we'll get to that point. 47% say that they're more likely to support knowing the city cannabis sales, knowing the city would carefully screen applicants, limit the number of stores to 1 or 2, require 24-hour security, regular site inspections, audits. Basically, we call these features, right? These would be features of your ordinance, and we ask people if these features make them more likely or less likely to support cannabis sales in the city, retail cannabis sales in the city. And you see a plurality start to say they are more supportive. I think there's a thing here, I don't know if that works, but on the left side. On the right side, we look at those who were originally opposed to cannabis sales, and you can see 18% or 16% say they're more likely to support it based on this information. And among those who are unsure, the big majority, 56%, rounding up, say they're more likely to support it based on these key features. And these are pretty typical features you would see in any place, the regulatory environment, to make sure that things are safe and done properly. So we then asked them about the prospect of the revenues the city could get. So here we start to talk to them about the money that is involved. The city would get 5 to 10% of revenues from these shops, totaling tens of thousands of dollars per month. All of a sudden, we have essentially a majority, 50%, who say they're more likely to support. You have a bigger group of those who were initially opposed, about 21%, and the similar group of those who were unsure coming on board saying they're more supportive. I will say our job is to present unbiased, accurate data to you. These are features that we're presenting. We're not trying to move people one way or the other. We're just telling them about the environment that might happen if this was to move forward. Next, we talk about the car trips, and the fact that, look, if you don't buy it here, you might go somewhere else. So 45% are more likely to support knowing that residents can go to Lake Elsinore to buy cannabis, and essentially they get the revenue from that. So not a hugely powerful message, but something that moves people to be more supportive to some degree. Next, this is a pretty condensed poll. We had a pretty limited budget, so we get right to the point of what we call kind of a neighbor-to-neighbor scenario. We have a conversation in the front yard, Smith saying allowing retail cannabis sales is a terrible idea. It would result in increased crime, traffic accidents. If people want to buy it, they can go somewhere else. A conversation that might actually happen by someone who is opposed to it. And then Jones, who says allowing retail sales in Canyon Lake is a great idea, no evidence of negative community impacts, and it could generate $300,000 in fees toward essential services and public safety. Our goal here is to take it out of the realm of yes, no, maybe, and put it into the context of how people might actually talk. And you see you have a majority who kind of agree with their neighbor Jones, who generally says, hey, this is not a bad thing, I like it, it's a good thing, and we're going to get something out of it. And you still have about 10% who are unsure. So as you can see, the final question on this subject is a question knowing what you know now, right? You have positives and some negatives, at least some negatives from Smith, who says this is a bad idea, it's going to cause crime and traffic. And in the end, you have majority support on the right-hand side, each of the columns. Informed support is at 52%. Informed opposition goes down to 37%, and the group that says it makes no difference to them is down at 7%, and about 4% who say they're unsure. So you essentially, in a vacuum, we've waged this outreach campaign by all kinds of folks who are supportive and opposed, and in that environment, you have a majority who support retail cannabis sales in the city. So we did ask a few more questions after that, and this one asking about home delivery. So you have a plurality supporting the idea of home delivery of cannabis, but again, a big chunk are opposing it, and a group that just don't know or don't care about the subject. We did also ask about transportation to consumption lounges, which admittedly probably doesn't sound like a great word. I'm sure there's a better marketing term, but you have a majority who says no, we don't want that. It's not a non-starter, just a majority who says no. And then we dive into some possibilities, some taxes. And let me say this about taxes. Every government in California is looking at the prospect of where to raise new revenues. So this is not atypical of every city, every water district, every agency that is operating efficiently, but still is in need of new revenues. So this is very typical for any work we do with any government agency, is to ask the question of how do we raise new revenues? And one prospect is a UUT, utility users tax. A parcel tax in that regard of $350 per year, and you have a near majority who says no, we don't want that. That's not for us, and that's not terribly surprising, but you clearly have a majority who says no. We have the prospect of a sales tax. Raising $300,000 to $400,000 per year, 1%, which is very typical of other cities in California, and you have 35% support, slim majority opposing it. The typical kind of work that would be done surrounding something like this would be significant outreach. Obviously, City Hall is never advocating for a tax, but doing outreach to explain the prospects of what could happen if you had the new revenues and the value of having those new revenues. And oftentimes, the community gets behind a tax like that because they realize the benefits that would happen. But it's just a policy decision and the outreach to be done. And then just gives you a picture of who your community is, just in case, just so you know, we matched the demographics of the community, which is a little bit older than the rest of California and a little bit whiter than the rest of California. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you for the opportunity.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I think probably we should probably pause after everyone makes their presentation to see if the council has any specific questions of that presenter. So maybe at this point would be a good time if you have specific questions of Mr. Probolski, and then we'll move on to Lieutenant Rails.
Okay, I'll start. This was the text message, that it was a text, an email, and a phone call?
Yeah, so we surrounded your voters. We sent text and emails. And we used the voter file, which is compiled by the Registrar of Voters for the county, and then match that to, the data is already there, but we also update to match current numbers and emails. And then we also made phone calls. So it says that 100 of the survey completed were on the telephone, 200 were online, and from there, most of those people on the telephone, of course, mobile phone 61%, but the rest were landlines, yes.
And so how did you come up with the section to poll?
So we randomly poll among your voter base, among all your voters.
Okay, so just, I mean, can you
Yes.
give me more details on how that
Sure.
happened?
Sure, so you have 7,034 voters, and so we'll take every nth voter. I mean, quite frankly, in this case, we probably reached out to every single voter, and at some point, we probably we possibly overwhelmed the phone system to reach everybody, because if we call 25 or 50 or 100 people at one time, it could be a problem. But essentially, we called and emailed everyone in the city, every voter in the city, in a city of this size. And until we got the matching demographics to make sure we got the right number of men and women, age group, and all the other demographics that we match. So, for instance, you happen to be a Republican town, majority-wise. You happen to have more, like I said, older voters than younger. 5% of your voters are foreign-born. 79% are permanent vote by mail, although I don't know what that really means anymore. And you have 9% are Latino, and 2% are Asian. So our job is to match all those demographics as closely as possible within a percentage point or two to make sure it's representative of your voters.
Okay. Anyone else have questions?
Yeah.
of Mr.
The design of the instrument to do the survey Is it designed to be the balance you did, 100 phone calls and 200 survey by email?
No, actually, by design, our methodology is to match what the public is, how they're responding, how your voters are responding. So in Canyon Lake, we had a larger group of respondents on the telephone. Because you have a little bit older population, a little bit, nobody's not tech savvy enough to get an email, and there are very few people who don't. But it's just your voters' preferred phone. In a lot of other cases, we're like 3/4 online and a quarter on the phone. But it just so happened that your voters are a little bit more phone friendly, and that's how it happened.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, if I may?
Yes.
The only question I have is in regards to, the poll was done via text message too. And I know that when the text came out, it was confusing. I had several people call me and say, what is this? This feels like a scam thing, and, we'll go from there. How did you categorize that as, because, texting is also instant messaging, which could be correspondent with online survey. So was by phone for texting and phone calls, or was it just for live, conversation?
So the 100 responses were live conversation with interviewers in English or Spanish. The 200 online, people got emails or they got a text message, and there was a link in there that was unique to that voter, and they were brought into the online experience. So either on their tablet, their computer, or their mobile phone, it was the same experience, or at least the same questions.
And the 200 that clicked the link finished the entire survey, or else it wouldn't be counted as part of the
Correct.
200?
Yeah, all 300 completed
Correct.
participants.
I just want to make that clear for the audience that
100%.
they made it all the way to the last question, so, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. How was the survey marketed? Was it marketed as a cannabis survey or a health of the city survey, or when they got the text, what was the basic, come help our city do a survey, or?
No, I think we actually discussed it with the city manager, and our general preference is to not have any particular, to kind of predispose people necessarily to what, I think the word got out that there was a city poll, and that's fine, but it wasn't, from City Hall, let's say. Our job is to get it unbiased results, and we don't necessarily want it to be, from the city, so it was just Canyon Lake residents, give us your opinion.
But it wasn't Canyon Lake residents, give us your opinion on cannabis? That's
No,
not- it wasn't.
the text and the email did not say that, and the phone call did not say that. Obviously, pretty quickly, people started to realize what the subject matter was about, but there was no introduction to say that was the subject matter.
Yeah, and most of the people that started the survey finished it. Once they found out it was kind of cannabis leaving, they didn't get a lot of hang-ups or drop-offs.
No, we had a very high participation rate in the city, so no, there's no particular drop-off because of that.
And you got you're saying you got quite a statistical size for our small little town.
Yeah, I mean, just, giving that comparison, right, if we're doing it's easy to equate it to politics, right? If you want to figure out who's going to win for sheriff in Riverside County, you do a 300, question survey, and you know what's going to happen. So, yeah, 300 in Canyon Lake, pretty robust, yes.
Welcome to Canyon Lake, we participate.
Question. Since the survey was done about a year and a half ago,
Yeah.
would there be an expectation that it would be very different if it was done today, based on your experience?
Look, I'm a pollster, so I want to poll more. So if you're asking me, should we do another poll? Yes. But do I have the expectation that opinions on this subject matter have particularly changed? No. And I would, look, our job is to inform policymakers, and I believe these numbers would be fairly static. I don't think there's a big change in this subject matter at all.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anything further? Okay. Thank you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Madam Mayor, I'd like to ask Lieutenant Rails to come up. We've got a click, here's the clicker right here.
Welcome.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council member, staff. When you first asked me to look into dispensaries and see if there's any studies on dispensaries related to specific crime in an area, I think because it's so new, there's not a lot of studies out there. So what I did is I looked at cities close by us, that I think is more relevant. So I studied the city of Lake Elsinore and the city of Paris. And what I pretty much did was take stats for those specific cities and kind of looked at the, on their regulations. And the two main things I was concerned about is where they put the dispensaries at. Lake Elsinore, we'll look at them first. Their dispensaries are on commercial areas. They're not in strip malls by other stores. They're pretty much in the commercial districts. And they also have a 24-hour armed security present at each of their dispensaries. So that's even after hours. And what's good about that is we don't have to worry about burglaries, window smash burglaries, when they're on scene. So look at some of the stats for the city of Lake Elsinore. I looked at 5 of the dispensaries that I studied. Not a lot of stats. There was a total of 27 calls for service extra just out of those businesses, which isn't a lot. Some of those violations were parking violations, disturbances, 911 calls, alarms, one incident of transient throwing a rock at a window, disturbance over mass, medical aid, suspicious vehicle, suspicious person. So there was nothing really that stood out in the city of Lake Elsinore when I was looking at crimes related to the dispensary or the location.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
Yes.
When you say 911 calls, are those different than the calls for service?
Yeah, 911 call might be someone accidentally called 911 from their
Oh.
cell phone at the business, or they might have accidentally called 911 and hung up.
Gotcha.
That's usually related to cell phones now.
Okay.
Look at the city of Paris. They're pretty much the same. Their dispensaries are in commercial locations. They also have 24-hour security present at the business. Now, I looked at 14 dispensaries, what the city of Paris has, and they had 173 total calls for service at those dispensaries. And a lot of the calls are the same, but if you look down towards the bottom, they had more of suspicious persons, robbery, assault with a deadly weapon with a gun. They had 2 stabbings, and those were related to those dispensaries over the last year. So you can see Paris is quite a few more calls for service and a little more violent. So looking at the next slide, considerations to look at when it comes to public safety, obviously location is huge. I think putting them in the commercial districts was helpful. I wasn't able to look at any dispensaries that were in strip malls, those types of things. So I would assume the calls for service would probably go up a little bit just because you're bringing in a lot more people. If you're looking at security, armed versus unarmed, and 24 hours versus business hours only. I think that's something you really need to look at. And then obviously your customers, where are you going to be pulling your customers from? Are they going to be local? Are they going to be from the surrounding area? Here I would assume you're going to pull, obviously your Canyon Lake residents. I would assume you're going to pull a lot of Menifee residents because they do not allow dispensaries there. Might pull some from Lake Elsinore, maybe some from Paris, so it's going to kind of be from all around area. So I think customers, when you're looking at that base, because Paris and Lake Elsinore is a big difference between the two. And we also got to look at vehicle traffic and parking issues. Obviously, if these dispensaries, sometimes when I've watched them, they're pretty busy. You're going to have a lot of customers in and out of the parking lot. It's going to bring in a little bit more traffic. And then code enforcement being proactive. I can speak for Lake Elsinore because I work with them. I don't know about Paris, wasn't able to speak to their code enforcement, but our code enforcement works closely with the dispensaries. They're constantly out there, they're talking to them, they're regulating, so as long as code enforcement's involved, it usually helps out a lot in resolving a lot of these problems. Sorry, I couldn't find anything else. I know you're trying to find out, more information on if it brings in crime or not. All I can show you is the stats. And me working in Lake Elsinore, we've hardly had any issues there. Speaking to the liaison lieutenant in Paris, he said they've had quite a few issues, so it's kind of a big difference for them compared to us.
I have a question.
Yes.
I noticed that Wildemar newly passed their ordinances, and they do have some of these in strip mall locations.
Yes.
I've seen one. And other than foot traffic, unless you knew it was there, you would
Yeah.
not know it was there.
Exactly.
Do you have any information about the stats in Wildemar at all?
Right now, there's really no stats to look at, so all I can do is go off of complaints and that type of thing. I spoke to one of my fellow lieutenants that covers Wildemar. No complaints so far, no issues, so nothing really to report there.
Wildemar is what, 5 weeks in? I think
Yeah,
it's,
very-
yeah.
yeah. Not really seen
Have you
stats.
have you talked at all to the folks in San Jacinto? I know that San Jacinto is one of the first cities that passed this ordinance, and they have multiple dispensaries. Just curious if you had a conversation with them.
No, I did not.
Okay.
I just looked at the two, figured they were closest.
I have personally reached out to one of Wildemar's council persons and talked to them, Ben Benoit. And to date, they have been, because of their high visibility in these particular centers, they've authorized 3 locations, 2 are open. And to date, which is still young, they have had 0 or minimal calls.
Yep.
And so far with the city and their code enforcement, they have experienced very low, I think, 1, because of the security on site, 2, the high visibility of the complexes and the parking, and it isn't like what I'll call a corner market that's kind of shady. These are well-lit, well-organized, and so from Wildemar's standpoint, so far, it's been very low as far as crime. Almost none.
And you can see Lake Elsinore, there's 27 calls. Most of those are, any business, you're going to have that many calls. So I think the armed security on scene is huge.
Councilmember Dane, do you have any questions on this?
No,
Okay.
not at this time.
Councilmember Welty,
I'm good.
anything else from you? Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yep, I'd like to ask our city attorney to lead us through the draft ordinance.
Thank you.
I'd just like to also say, after Mr. Graham, we'll ask Mr. McPherson from HDL to come up, and then probably take public comment after that, and then bring it back to the council to deliberate and discuss.
Good evening, council. I'll present from the podium here because I know sometimes we can get a crink in our neck looking that way and then looking back this way. So you do have in your packet a draft ordinance that was put together. Lots of work with the city's consultants, HDL, the city manager's office, my office, with input from the sheriff. So one of the things that the sheriff was talking about was the importance of armed 24-hour security. And so you'll notice that that requirement exists at, I believe, 3 separate locations in our ordinance. The city manager wanted to make sure that everyone got the message. So I'm going to go through and talk about sort of the big picture policy issues that you may want to tackle. Obviously, you have a copy of the ordinance. If you want to go into the nitty-gritty on any one of those items, I'm ready to talk about that too. But I thought just for the ease of discussion, I wouldn't just sit up here and read 34 pages of draft statutes. You're welcome. So the 5 sort of big picture policy issues that I think are important to look at in the ordinance is, number 1, the allowed business types. So you've seen the conversation, the polling, you've seen the discussion. What we're looking at is retail only. There are many other commercial cannabis activities that you can engage in. That includes cultivation, the growing of cannabis plants, manufacturing, turning those cannabis plants into other products such as oils, distribution and transportation, and laboratory testing. If we were a city of significant size with large industrial zones or large agricultural areas, those other activities might be of interest to the city council. But seeing as how we are a city primarily 90% residential with, I believe, 3 commercial areas, I believe the intention was to look just at retail. Permissible locations, again, we're not a large city, so there's only so many places we can go, and we can talk specifically about where those places are. The number of businesses, you heard the city manager reference during his presentation, and you saw in the polling discussion of a limitation on the number of businesses that would operate in the city. That's not a decision you have to make today, but it would be helpful, I think, to have the discussion about it, because if you did pass the ordinance, we would bring a resolution in the future that would set that limit for you before we engage in the application process. Number 4 is the permit application procedures. So I'm going to give a general overview from the ordinance side, the legal side, about what those procedures might look like under this ordinance. And then finally, different from the application procedure is how do we actually approve the permits? Who does the approving? What is that process? So we'll dive right in. Again, the goal, so I put this just here sort of like a roadmap as well. We're looking for council member direction, we're looking for public input, and we're hoping to finalize this ordinance and either do the first reading tonight, get direction to bring it back for first reading in the future, or get told that, you know what, thank you for all the work on the ordinance, but we're not interested. Go over, again, the application process, and then really dive into what I think is, you saw it in the polling, which is what are the community benefits and how are these businesses going to operate in our community. So, like I said, your options on the ordinance are make desired amendments and introduce for first reading, continue to a future meeting, or table it, and it's gone for a while. So policy issue number 1, which types of cannabis businesses to allow? Staff recommendation is retail only, allowing both storefront and delivery. I do have the citation there to the exact section of the draft ordinance. The rationale for that is, like I said, we just don't have the industrial land, we don't have the agricultural land. So I don't know where those types of activities would be located. I don't even know if there'd be that much interest in locating those kind of businesses in our community as our borders currently stand. So we're looking at retail only, and that's what's in the ordinance. Yes, Mayor.
I do have a
I see the pen.
Am I allowed to?
You're the
just
mayor.
Jump in here?
You
Well,
can
I
do
know.
whatever you want.
I mean, I know, but I don't want to, throw you off. How does that work with online sales?
So online sales would be permissible. The only regulations we have are related to the use of unattended kiosks that you see in some of the more unregulated dispensaries. So if people wanted to do online and wanted to do delivery, that would be supported by our regulatory ordinance. I think it's a very popular methodology. It also obviously results in a significant, you don't really see that activity. So it wouldn't have as many nuisance effects.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Okay.
Let's see, I think that might be the only slide on that policy. Any other questions about, which business type we're talking about here?
No?
Okay. Policy issue number 2, permissible locations. Again, we are blessed with a small community, so I don't have to create maps like I have to do in other cities and say, well, if we do this rule, here's where it's going to go. We really only have the town center here. We have Eastport, and I think those are the only 2 that would really make sense. So the staff recommendation is the C1 zone, and it cannot be adjacent to sensitive uses. So those are defined in the ordinance and in state law. And that means can't be next to a school, can't be next to a daycare center, can't be next to a youth center. I would put a little asterisk here, because I think it's important. My job is to fully inform you about what I'm doing here. State law, the default is 600 feet from those uses. We are recommending it for adjacent because frankly, we don't have enough room. If you want to have one of these uses in the town center, and you want it, to be capable of going into a place, I mean, if someone needs to find a location, they've got to get a lease. That means there can't be a tenant there with a lease that exists. Then, we need to look at it from that perspective. And going to an adjacent, preventing the adjacent, would seem to allow that sort of trade-off between options for people to find locations in the town center versus, not wanting it to be literally right next door to a school or something like that.
Wait, before you move on to that, anyone have questions about?
Yeah, a library would be considered a school, wouldn't it? I mean, you have kind of a, not including but not limited to statement, which kind of gives a big door, and then you kind of shut the door a little later on, which, I understand we're trying to communicate a line, and it's not always that easy.
I would say that if library is important to you, direct me to put library in the ordinance. Because, it's one thing for me to say, I'm interpreting the ordinance to include library. I'm sure everyone was here for the roof rehab presentation. You have a lot of people who are very interested in coming to the community, and I think establishing those rules and being very specific is going to be important for their business purposes. They want to know off the bat where they can go and where they can't go.
Okay, we have a library, we also have a church. Do we
That's
have,
part of the school as well.
as part of the school function? So the church school would be, even just a church without a school would be considered.
Other jurisdictions I've worked with have added religious facilities as one of the sensitive uses that you cannot be adjacent to.
But that's not in ours.
It's not currently in yours, no. So if you want to add that, if that's important to you, we can look at adding that. I believe we have one religious facility in the town center right now. That building is owned by the city, so.
Could this be challenged because of its differences between the state regulations and local? Do we have control, or, when I say local control, do we have control over it where someone couldn't take us to challenge us based on what state law is and what local law is?
That's a good question. So first of all, anyone can sue us on anything.
Sure.
And, with cannabis permitting, you oftentimes get into that. A lot of money is at stake. We have attempted to create a process here that is very objective to eliminate the potential for successful challenges. On that specific question, state law expressly authorizes the city to change those sensitive use buffers by ordinance.
Any other questions on this policy consideration? No, okay. Dale?
Is the adjacent part in this section? It seemed like I read the adjacent piece farther down the road. So we want to cover adjacent properties now?
Yes, so this talks about the zone and talks about the buffers from other uses. So if there are things you want to discuss on adding sensitive uses, changing the buffer distances, this is the section of the presentation that I have allocated for that.
I appreciate the 600's probably unrealistic. There's not a problem there with, I get that. What I'm getting is not adjacent. If a kid's going to the library and say you got the library, the mattress store, and the cannabis store, it's going to be hard for the kids to get out of the car and not, go by the dispensary. Or if they're going to the church and it's over there in the Pizza Domino's, say that's where the cannabis, well, they're all going to go to church and they're going to be walking right by the dispensary. I don't think that doesn't feel right to me. It feels like we should be able to find, let's call them safe zones to locate them, but there are clearly places in the center that I don't believe are space zones. And I don't think adjacent is far enough.
Well, it's certainly a policy decision. It's why it's policy issue number 2 for the council to decide. I would say that in that regard, I have seen cities try to do this where they're like, okay, we don't want you near this, we don't want you near this, we don't want you near this. And when you do all the rules, there's nowhere to go. So you have to be a little judicious with it. The other thing that I would point out is we do have significant regulations on the signage, on the appearance of the retail dispensaries, on odor control. And I think if you look at what it looks like in other communities, unless you know you're going there, you won't know what it is. At least that's the intent. That's the desire. It's you're not going to see giant green neon cannabis leaves, shining in the town center. So that's the intent. So the intent is both sides. One, not have them adjacent, but also make sure that it is not going to be screaming out loud what it is.
And that's, again, one of my concerns. My concern is I am totally good with regulated cannabis dispensaries. I think that they're a plus to society versus the illegal cannabis business. Totally fine with that. I think it's a great choice to regulate and put some controls on it. I got to tell you, for those who I visited the cannabis stores, can't be more impressed with the regulations that go inside the 4 walls. So as far as what goes on in the 4 walls, if it's anything close to what I saw, I have zero issue with that. So just want to let you know that there are some things that I totally accept and actually encourage. But I am kind of concerned about the signage, because we had a discussion, a week and a half ago about the Supreme Court and their ruling about content. And so I'm hearing today we can control content, and yet I'm hearing the other day we can't control content. And how does content apply to this?
That's an excellent point. So a cannabis dispensary is a highly regulated industry. We are capable of exerting greater regulatory control over their advertising, as opposed to, just for an example, because I park right in front of them every time I'm here, Daisy Dukes. It's a retail clothing outlet. We have very little control over the content of something like that. Additionally, anyone who'd be getting a permit from the city would be entering into an operational agreement with the city that would describe, some of these concerns and how they need to be addressed. But I can tell you, signage is very important. Is very important because I know that I've heard the discussions when this has come up as a discussion item. The council is very concerned. The city manager throughout the process was very concerned that this needs to fit in with the city of Canyon Lake, right? You can't just pick it up from another community where maybe they advertise a little differently and plop it down here.
And another question, what we have a lot of, let's say we have a reasonable control of what goes on inside our city boundaries. We can say we have reasonable controls right inside the boundaries. But what I don't want to do is drive down to 15 and see this 40 by 30 sign with a light on it, say, cannabis dispensary, Canyon Lake Center, take a turn up. Do we have any control of signage for something inside the city, outside the city?
So one of the express provisions of the ordinance that is there, I'm sorry, the internet's a little spotty, so I'm not able to bring up the exact section. It does prohibit the use of billboards to advertise any operational dispensary in the city of Canyon Lake.
And so the bill, how big of signs can they put outside the city limits then?
It prohibits off-site billboards, period.
Just about any signage then?
Yes. In addition, I know billboards have been very popular with retail dispensaries. There's been recent changes in the case law that do limit their ability to operate on interstates. So you've seen some of them coming down, especially out towards the desert. I know that it's basically all dispensary advertisements that are coming down. You see them mostly on state highways now.
Just my own comment, I literally have zero issue with internet advertising. I mean, there's got to be some limits, of course, but the Facebook pages, that kind of thing, I don't have a concern about that. I have a concern about big signs and signage.
Okay.
Anything else on policy issue number 2?
I just want to say, section 420, I got you on that. Real cute, Mr. City Attorney.
Well, I thought it was important that everyone know what that section of the municipal code referred to.
Very, very well done.
All right, policy issue number 3, a number of permits. This is something that I was hoping to just get some kind of discussion from the council, maybe a little bit of direction on. If the ordinance was approved, we would come back with a resolution that would set the number of licenses that were permissible. We don't set that in the ordinance, only because amending ordinances takes a significant amount of time. Passing a resolution to change it, if the council felt it was appropriate, is much cleaner. The staff recommendation is 1 retail permit to be set by a future resolution of the city council. And the rationale behind this is generally in other communities where I've operated, where our consultants have operated, they're looking at 1 retail permit per 10,000 residents. That's dang on center for the city of Canyon Lake. When we're doing that low number, though, one of the biggest concerns that I would have, because I've litigated this issue, is whether you are creating a monopoly. For that, you got the 1 license, and so you are the kingpin now, right? You're the only gas station in town. You're the only barber in town. Don't get on my bad side. But we don't really have that issue here, as we have adjacent jurisdictions. As the Sheriff's Department mentioned, 2 adjacent jurisdictions have numerous retail dispensaries. So whoever gets the permit here in Canyon Lake would be competing with those, which are within a couple of miles. It could be raised in the future if the council felt that was wise, Generally, it's easier to increase the number of permits than it is to say, you know what, that was too many, we want to drop it. It's a lot harder to do it at that point. So we're recommending one. If the council, one of the things on the polling throughout the entire discussion, we were knocking around 1 or 2 was the language we were using. But we had to have a recommendation, so we recommended 1. I think that's the only slide I have on that. So do you want me to stop, Mayor, or you want me to keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. Now I'm going to talk just generally about the application process. I'm going to try not to be too duplicative because we do have the person who's actually going to be overseeing the application process from HDL here. He has slides that are talking about this exact same issue. So I'm just going to do very high level. When we are talking about the application process, we are foreseeing there is a pre-application review. So that is the zoning review. So this is before you even file an application and pay the huge application fee, you are going to verify that the location that you want to operate in meets the zoning requirements. And the reason for that is you don't want to put together these big old applications and then find out that, oh, you're adjacent to, a secret library that nobody knew about. You also want to do the background checks early because, again, you keep the fee small, people find out, you know what, there's an issue here. They find out very early on. So that's before they even file the application. Phase 2, what I'm calling it, which is the actual application process. What you're looking at here is the city manager, presumably working very closely with HDL, does an objective scoring. The criteria are known to all the applicants in advance. They are awarded points for meeting certain standards. And all it is determining whether they're qualified or not qualified. We're not saying who the best one is. We're not saying who the worst one is. We're just saying, you made it, you made it, you made it. Sorry, you have significant problems with your application. You're not qualified. And then phase 3, this is where the city manager engages in a community benefit negotiation with those who are qualified. So all qualified applicants would meet with the city manager. They would talk about what community benefits they're prepared to offer to the community to offset the negative effects of their operation. And frankly, whoever offers the highest and best community benefits would be the one selected for the permit. That would be an objective process. We use an objective process in other communities to evaluate the community benefits that are being offered. We're looking at who's going to be bringing the most to Canyon Lake. And that's, you go with the highest one. If we're only offering 1 permit, they get it. If we're offering 2, you go to the highest, then you go to the next highest. So policy issue number 4 is talking about the procedures that I just walked through. We're recommending a qualification-based program. Like I said, you get objective scoring. You're decided whether you're qualified or not. We're not ranking you at that place. We're not doing a lottery. And those are sort of the other 2 kind of options that we have that you see in other communities. So the first one, like I just said, is a lottery. And so that's basically people put in their applications. We bring out the bingo wheel, and we say number 42, you got the permit. You could say that there's a lot of fairness in that, in the sense that you're taking a lot of bias out of it. But on the flip side, you have absolutely no community control over who is going to be getting that permit. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the objective ranked process. So same applications, but they get scores, and whoever has the highest score is the one getting the permit or being recommended to get the permit. A lot of community involvement in that one. And the reason why we're not recommending that process is purely to save me a significant amount of work. The objective ranked process results in a lot of litigation. So if we have 1 permit available and you are number 2 on the total number of points that were issued, you have a lot of incentive to come after the city to knock out number 1. Because if number 1 gets knocked out, you move up, then you get the permit. So by going with the quasi-objective scores that we're talking about, where we're simply saying, here's the minimum threshold to be qualified, and everyone who meets that is qualified and moves on to the next phase, you kind of get the best of both worlds. You're getting a quality application, but you are not creating an incentive to litigate with the city. This sort of goes into additional detail on those 3 things that I just talked about. And as I said, the lottery is essentially random. You have significant evaluation on the objective ranked, and qualification kind of allows for a little bit of both.
Can I ask, the qualification procedure takes it into the hands of the consultant and the city manager?
Yes.
No council input?
Yes, so that's actually policy question number 5. This is just the process of scoring, but you could do it both ways. So you could go with a qualification process and have the city manager making the determination. You could go with a qualification process and the council is making the determination on who is qualified, who has met those criteria. So I've got whole slides talking about the who makes the decision. This is mostly just the what decision is being made.
Got it.
So again, just going into a little more detail, you have the pre-application screening, and I'm going to let Dave talk a little bit more about that because he has more slides on it. But essentially, we're looking at those issues. Where are you at and who are you? The objective scoring, the kind of things they're going to be looking at are going to be the business plan, labor and local enterprise support, neighborhood compatibility, how are you going to fit into our town center, how are you going to fit into Canyon Lake, safety and security. They have to put in a security plan. They have to put in a safety plan. They have to talk to us about how are they going to secure the cash, a lot of cash on premises. How are they going to secure the products that they offer to sale? And then lastly, location, and that's not just the where, it's also what does it look like? What's the inside look like? How much money are you putting into this project to make it compatible with the city? All of those things are just bullet points, but they will be approved, the application criteria, those categories, and what exactly we're looking for would come back with a future resolution. So this is just kind of a preview.
Is that your question?
Yes. I'm backing up a little bit. Your experience with the regulatory side of, and the legal side of the cannabis for the communities you represented.
Yes.
How often has the council been the final decider on who gets the applicant?
That was a very early on model, and it led to, let me put this, it led to a significant amount of intrigue and issues with campaign donations.
Yeah, I think what it leads to us is that it has a sense of possibly favor of or something
pay to
else.
play.
And so I think from a political standpoint, however we go, my recommendation for our council, and I know I got 4 other people, but I think we need to stay out of the final decision and leave it to the professionals if we decide to go that way, and the city manager's team, so that there is no feeling that the council influenced that applicant or the applicant got influenced through a council member, because I think that leads to bigger problems for us.
That very well could be the case. That's certainly the current trend, is towards the council adopting the criteria, adopting the process, but not being the final decision maker.
Right. What comes to mind is the city of Adelanto.
They came
And that is not a good, that is not a good model in a lot of ways.
I think that's fine. And I think that, when we get to policy question number 5 is who's going to make the decision. And we'll kind of go through a little bit more of that.
Sorry, I jumped the gun.
No, it's fine. Staff's recommendation is that the city manager, working with staff, will work with objective criteria that are developed by the council, and then we'll issue the permits. Preview of the next slide. But this is the general talking about what kind of things we're looking for in the applications themselves. It is, again, going to be if this ordinance is adopted, so you're going to get a resolution setting the number of licenses. You're going to get a resolution setting the application and other fees that will be required to participate in the process. You will get a resolution establishing what are called the review criteria. Those are primarily drafted by HDL, but reviewed by my office. And they go into depth with what an application needs to include, how you get points for those things. Because I think, if someone's going to invest the amount of time and energy it takes to do one of these applications, we need to be as upfront at the beginning as possible with what are we looking for. Okay. So going through this again, the recommendation would be that the city manager will look at the objective scoring, compare that to the threshold, the minimum threshold, which is set by the city council, and then determine who's qualified and who's not. The ordinance also requires, after the applicants are determined qualified or not, the city manager has to hold a noticed public meeting where members of the community get to come in and weigh in on those applications that have been determined qualified. So to your point, Councilmember Welty, if someone comes in and they're pretty close to the library or pretty close to another location, community can come in and say, we're concerned about that location. And one of the things that the city manager will then do is look at entering into operational agreements that address those community concerns going forward. And then the next step would be to enter into negotiations for community benefits. It's anticipated, you saw it in the polling, you've seen it in other descriptions, that applicants will offer to contribute to the city's general fund to offset negative community impacts from the operation of the dispensary, but also just to enhance public safety services within the community. So, we're anticipating things like offers of a certain percentage of revenue or flat amounts to the city's general fund. Policy issue 5. All right. So this is the who's making those decisions that Councilmember Green referenced before. And the staff recommendation, based on all those issues that you brought up, Councilmember, is that the city manager is the issuing authority for the cannabis permits. I can tell you that my office, as you know, advises the city of Hemet. City of Hemet just went through cannabis regulatory process, and they ultimately landed on the same process as well, which is where the city manager is the one issuing the permits if they meet the criteria. And the purpose of that is exactly as you said, to eliminate some of those complicating issues. The alternative here, just for discussion, is approval by the city council itself. That was much more common early on. It still exists in a lot of communities. If you wanted to go down that route, I would recommend that we look at maybe some mitigation. So prohibitions on certain types of contact with council members during the permitting process, in addition to those state law regulations regarding ethics that already exist and which we have all been trained on. And that's the end of my presentation. Now, again, it's 34-page ordinance. I didn't go through every bit of it. There's a lot in there. Operational requirements, just to give you a taste of some of those. No display of cannabis or graphical depictions of cannabis or cannabis products. You cannot be able to sense the odor of cannabis or cannabis products from outside the structure or outside the suite if it's in a suite. So if they share a suite with another business, we should be able to go into that adjacent business and we shouldn't be able to detect the odor of cannabis. 24-hour armed security, regardless of what their operating hours are. Mr. City Manager, do you remember what the operating hours that we were recommending were?
I believe it was it 8 a.m.? 9 to 9 or 9 to 10, I believe
9
it
to
was.
10, so you have operating hours in there. Those are important things to consider.
Can I ask a question? Is that the same as the smoke shops?
I'm not sure what their hours are, yeah.
Okay.
So I think it was important just to kind of, touch on that those are some of the things that are in that ordinance. I didn't put them as big policy issues, but if the council wants to go through them and we want to talk about them and give direction on amendments, we absolutely can do that.
Were the only options for community benefit offering percentages or flat fees?
No, they're not. There are certainly other options available, but we are going to be looking for something that is easy to objectively score. And so, if you're offering a percentage of revenue, we have a projection for what that is. It's very easy to rank those. If you're offering something that's a little less tangible, we're going to rely on HDL to give us an objective scoring, and we'll have to see where that lands. But, in other communities, they offer to sponsor Little League teams or offer to do this or that. I guess we'll just have to sort of look at what that is, if it's offered.
So you had a statement that they couldn't provide marijuana or marijuana-type symbols or something in the advertising or the signage. That was a basic statement.
descriptions or depictions of cannabis or cannabis products are prohibited in the advertising at the facility.
Who would, does the city manager, can we give him the ability to make the decision what he feels is appropriate or inappropriate? As far as what, we create cannabis symbols and they become kind of secretive and eventually become normal. What's the paper saying Smoking Joe or whatever it was? And they, all of a sudden, you could just put a big thing of papers on the front of your store. And you're not saying cannabis, you're just saying smoking papers. And there's all sorts of ways to depict that it's obviously cannabis without throwing a leaf out there. And who has that discretion, I guess?
So the city, in addition to all the other regulations that are in the ordinance, the city manager has authority under the ordinance to impose additional conditions and regulations on the operation of these facilities, because times change, right? It's impossible to write an ordinance that prohibits every type of conduct that very creative and smart individuals can come up with. To evade them, the city manager is tasked with enforcing the spirit of the ordinance, and he is empowered to adopt additional regulations and conditions.
Thank you. That's a great one.
Can I ask a question? How does the symbol of cannabis or advertising of that product differ from signage that we talk about that fall under the freedom of speech?
Yeah, so, I knew this was going to come up because of the discussion last time.
Right.
You all saw me sweating over here as we were talking
Correct.
about saying, we're going to let all the signs go. So cannabis is different than a clothing store. Cannabis is different from a restaurant. It's a highly regulated industry. Our ability to impose additional regulations on it is well-founded in the law. I'm not terribly worried about that.
Okay, so I'm just saying that someone comes along and we regulate how they advertise, if they advertise in our city, and it happens to fall into that category, as we were talking about signage last week, you think we're well protected?
So we're going to have time, place, manner restrictions, the same as we would have on anybody else. There may be limited instances of what would be called a content-based restriction, no displaying of a cannabis leaf or the depictions. Those need to be very narrowly tailored, so we need to be very specific about what it is that we're prohibiting, and we need to be serving a very high government interest when we do that. We have that here with a industry that's highly regulated and which consumption is prohibited by anyone under 21. So I think we're on solid legal ground. I think most well-run dispensaries don't rely on cannabis leaves and green neon signs to be good business people and to get their product out. I think they have alternative avenues that they do that, and I think that's the kind of business that we'd be looking for if we did an ordinance like this.
I mean, there's a reality in Canyon Lake for everyone, that if you want people to know something, you go to the 5 big pages and you put it on there. And in 5 minutes, anything you could ever get out of 10, 20, you get more than 5 minutes there, you'd get out 10 years of sign. And that's just I know it's just my opinion, but the ability to market is pretty unbelievable without the signs.
And I would simply say the marijuana or the cannabis dispensaries that I've seen that are of the caliber you're probably looking for here, they don't call themselves something that, it's very obvious. They don't have that kind of advertising mentality. So we'll be looking at that on the operational side. We'll be looking at that on the ordinance side, but I'm not overly concerned about that at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
All right,
Thank
Madam
you so
Mayor.
much.
I'd like to ask David McPherson, our consultant with HDL, to come up to the podium.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council, for letting me be here with you guys tonight to guide over. Stephen covered a lot of things, so I'll try to focus on things that he did not, and you asked a lot of great questions today, and part of that process is looking at the business coming in to examine that to begin with. But just before I go into this, just quick background for the audience and you is HDL only works for government. We represent 500 cities and counties in California for multiple different consulting services. We represent 200 cities in California for just cannabis. We have done over 18,000 investigations, inspections, and compliance to state of Nevada, California, and Colorado, overseeing business cannabises for 10 years. We have half our team is former law enforcement, and the other side is fraud examiner, former FBI, DEA, things of that nature, and involved in a lot of this oversight of what we do. And we currently oversee 1,800 businesses in behalf of our cities and counties that we represent, and some of them here in Riverside County. So with that comes a lot of experience, understanding dynamics, addressing a lot of the questions and concerns you have in the process. And as Stephen mentioned, it's kind of a three-step process that he mentioned on here in a variety of things. You know, he pointed about the verification, the zoning verification, the importance of that because of the things he brought out about after the fact. We also find property owners that say, oh yeah, this property is eligible. They go through the process, find out it's not, and then it's too late. And then we have a bunch of appeals and litigation issues in there. And why the property consent form is important on the front end of that process, so we don't run into any challenges with that. The other thing that would down the road is that the ordinance addresses the change of ownership. People come in here, get the permit, turn around and try to sell it because they're just trying to be speculators and get a permit. And so we have what we call a owner acknowledgement letter regarding who's owning the business, how the ownership changed, no creative formations of businesses that in the early days was done quite a bit. We try to reduce that in the process by having that part of the application process. And then all the forms and the requirements that are associated with that in that on the front end. Stephen mentioned a lot of this stuff. You know, one of the things that we find out, and I want to emphasize some of the other areas that he did not, one is business plan. We don't want a business get awarded a permit and then sit on it for four years because they cannot get up and running. Part of the business plan is we want to look at their assets, ability to be funded. We want to look at their construction models. We want to see that they've created, you know, how they're going to, you know, possibly for 18 months pay a lease that's an empty building, go through the TI process, you know, hire security, hire staffing, you know, pay good wages, create all the labor requirements by that. And so all that is very critical of a business not only saying that, but demonstrating the ability to do that, because you want to bring the best of breed in here, and more importantly, you don't want them to shut down and not get up and running, and that's part of the process. State law requires that if you have 20 employees or more, that you have to have a labor agreement. So we just want to make sure that all the good practices of quality of why you're looking at here, trying to create some jobs here that are not just, you know, entry level, you know, minimum wage jobs in here, that we put that as part of that, and it's a diversified, you know, employment as well. And then we mentioned the security. You know, the lieutenant mentioned about the importance of that security plan. There's a lot of best practices, especially for retail. We call CEPTEB-related security by environmental design, of how that is created. A lot of those plans we're looking at and some of the criteria we're asking for. And then, of course, you want to make sure the employees are safe. Fire wants to make sure these places are safe, that they've thoughtfully looked at all those things in there. And then qualifications of owner, of what experience they have. It doesn't have to be cannabis related. It could be rating in pharmacy. It could be just, you know, running retail at a high regulated. It could be running, you know, bars or restaurants. Something that's very regulated. They understand the commitment, the requirements on that, so they don't make mistakes, and they have some kind of diversity in their teams of doing that. You mentioned a lot about the neighborhood compatibility. This is critical. It's not just, you know, one of you mentioning about, well, you know, I don't want kids walking by. Well, we want to know how they're going to address kids getting out of school or going to school at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock, you know, path of access to you, how they're going to address some of those things, exposure to some of the things regarding signage and nature of that. That is an important component in there of how they're addressing that, and how close they are to a library, how close they are to a bar that's down the road, parking challenges that come into play during certain times. And that's kind of tied a little bit to the location, but we're looking for different things that we do in number 6 as we are doing in number 7. 7's clear of where you're going to zone it, and some of the challenges of just the location itself. Stephen went a lot into the community benefits. You know, the primary on there is focus on what the economic incentives to the cities, but we're also looking in there as part of the scoring is, what are they doing other to be a corporate citizen? Volunteering, participating in special events, you know, contributing other ways other than financial. And a lot of these businesses got some amazing plans that those that are applying are applying here are going to show to you and demonstrate those capability. But we want to make sure that they're being a good corporate citizen as well, above and beyond the economic incentives directly to the city itself. So what we do in that process, kind of just visually thinking about it, is that presentation potentially to the city manager or to you, depending which direction you go, is a presentation potentially kind of just framing all the things that they put in paper. Because we also want to see that they didn't just hire someone to put this pretty thing, beauty contest together, but they can't demonstrate to you really of what they're capable of doing. And sometimes you don't really get that message until they actually get an opportunity to speak to you and really convey what their message and their goal is of their business and what they're anticipating for you specifically for your community. And then that can be taken consideration of in the final selection of what they're going to provide to you in the economic incentives of the community benefit. So going into the financial component of this, and this is important, you've talked about Willamar, you've talked about Lake Elsinore and the places around you that get access to you. Riverside County is one of the fastest growing counties in the nation, if not minimum, at least in California. And so you're looking at a market share that's going to continue and grow. So in Riverside County, currently there are 70 retailers in Riverside County up and down, and it is a big county spread out there. And so what I did a couple of days ago before I provided this to staff is really like run the comps like you're going to be doing, you know, what you would do for like a real estate type. So the average retail sales in Riverside County is $5 million. The mean, which means out of 70, number 35, 36, is roughly $3 million. So you split the average of those two of a good quality business that can come in at a minimum conservatively should be making $4 million. If we see the right market as they go through this process, they're going to demonstrate you that they're in that upper tier and they should be producing 5 to potentially more than that as a business model. So what I try to provide you here is one is what would it look like because you're only limited to potentially 1 or 2 is where sometimes the tax rate is 4 to 6 in a very competitive market component where there's like Paris has, up to the 7 or 8 they have, and others have multiple there. Where you're kind of a standalone, or even if it was 2, you can ask a little more for that in consideration of that to see who's interested and willing to pay that, but also can demonstrate that their model was going to work in order to offset these costs that they're going to have to them. So I provided you a 6% and an 8% and a 10%, just incrementally there, just to give you a different look of what that is. But basing it on the $4 million, you're going to get the Bradley Burns 1% sales tax. It doesn't matter what the potential benefit rate might be for a tax down the road. That's based on the $4 million. You're going to get the 1% with this assumption. And this is only a scenario and assumption, not a factual what will come, but very, I would say, very conservative that this was what potentially can be, where you would get the sales tax and then potentially with that. And then the last bullet, what I did, because you mentioned earlier about what a flat tax, what would a flat fee look like? So what then I did is I took that mean, which was the $3 million, and said, okay, what the mean would be at a minimum at the 6%. So let's say they're struggling, it's a tough market, you wanted to create at least a minimum low base bar of a guaranteed flat rate so that you at least know we're going to get this guarantee no matter what for that business being here, helps in the budgeting process. But then if they happen to perform better than that, it would be the minimum guarantee or 6% or whatever rate that you would set on that would be there. So a minimum, you would have a flat rate guarantee out of that. So that's how I came up with that as part of the formula in there. So I wanted to be mindful a little bit. Again, Waldemar's not all the way up. I was trying to look in that and take those in consideration as well, that you could end up with another 8 to 10 retailers in Riverside County, and you never know. 2 years from now, Menifee may decide to open up, and someone else might be expanding. So I wanted to make sure that we were very mindful of consideration of that growth. But also 2 things keep in mind in there. Right now, there is actually about 46, there's a demand in retail in Riverside County for a minimum almost 46 to 50 more retailers. And so part of that is that we are moving in the opposite direction on more illegal activity going into the illicit market. So if you can bring more of that illicit market to the legal market, that's where these revenues go up for these retailers. And there's areas out in the Central Valley that we've got tax on those agencies that there is no way mathematically they can generate that kind of revenue, and they are, because we're seeing the illegal market come in where there's more opportunities for consumers to provide products. So with that, I will pause. If there's, I think we're going to ask questions afterward, but unless there's questions now that you'd like me to answer.
You have a question?
Yeah.
I'm looking at your numbers, and what about if the market gets saturated? In other words, you do say we're growing and we are large. Would this adversely impact our numbers? I mean, if we've got 15 dispensaries within, and I'm just throw that out. Obviously, Lake Elsinore's got, Paris has got, Wildamar's got. Would that, have you factored that in, or are you factoring these numbers just off a population base of Canyon Lake and maybe surrounding part of Menifee to come up with that point of purchase?
So we took these, so as I mentioned to you, we have all the financial data of every cannabis retailer in California.
Okay.
So what I did last Friday is I ran the numbers for only Riverside County and did the comps based on that.
So these are the mean averages?
The mean and the average. So the average is 5 million. So if you take all 70 retailers, from some that are significantly up there in numbers to the base of that 70, and you average the 70, that was 5 million. If you took the mean, which would be 35, 36, say what is, of an average business, or one that's, not on the top there, we don't want to skew these numbers, but one that's barely making it or doing okay but not wonderful, that's where the 3 million came from. So that's why I took the average of the 5 and the 3 to get 4 million on there. But to answer your other question, we have cities with a population of 10,000, in the Central Valley that are generating 30 million. They have a retailer making $30 million a year. And there's 4 or 5 of those cities. And the reason why is you're bringing more out of the illicit market and moving into the legal market. So these numbers could actually improve. Even and we look at the saturation, is we don't have a saturation yet. The total population of Riverside County still can sustain almost 50 more retailers in the county itself.
Okay. Now is that considered entire county or split between western and eastern?
Entire county for the 50. But as
Okay.
far as you look at a market base as where your market can be, even with what you got in Waldemar and what you have in Lake Elsinore, and looking at how they're performing, you're going to shift a little of that where you're going to take some of that market share, because logistically, you're just going to cut them off out of path depending on certain logistical and strategic locations.
Okay, thank you.
Jen? Sorry, Councilwoman Dane.
I understand the minimum guarantee, having that as an option, but how are the revenues and the money associated with that, who monitors that? Is that just from the point of sale, or is it a combination of auditors? How is that monitored to make sure that whatever the appropriate dollar amount is captured for the city?
So there's one you could do at the local agency. At a minimum, the retailers are going to be paying sales tax and excise tax. So that's also done by the CDTFA, that they've got a group of people that will do audits of just the sales tax and excise tax. So it's the same gross receipts for that component, although they're not looking at what could be the local portion of that and any modifications to where that's actually done. I think the city manager indicated that, a third party such as us that oversees already 1,800 that we do audits on, you can have a higher tier of accountability, just like you may have for TOT or business tax or whatever, that keeps them a little more accountable to make sure that they're not modifying any books and that you've got some proper oversight on them.
Did you have another question? No? Okay. Councilman Welty?
I'm good, thank you.
you? Okay. I did have a question. I was reading in our proposed ordinance, and I wanted to know your input on this. It looks like the renewal for permits, if after issued, would be a 12-month period, right? A standard city business license. And they could be denied or additional stipulations put in place. How often do you see that occurring where it looks like a business was selected and wasn't working out and ejected, or the stipulations modified?
So I think at the beginning of the evaluation, depending on who makes the decision, is that they're going to present to you what they want to represent to you is, but this is how we're going to do something. So if they make certain commitments to you for the things in the criteria we're going, which is why you make that decision to them, potential revenues, how they treat their employees, labor agreements, all that stuff, you can make those a condition in terms of that permit. If they violate that, they basically violate the conditions of those tournament, which gives you an opportunity to reconsider or revoke it based on that violation of that, as you would. And Stephen may be able to expand on that when it comes to just like any other type of permit you may have, and how you would treat that before you take that action. But primarily, you have to have just cause in order to do that.
Do you see that occurring?
We do have it on some of them. You try to give them the opportunity to modify it, and time changes. We went through COVID, and there were some logistical challenges that businesses had, that changed their model where they weren't allowed to do delivery, and then delivery was the only thing that can be done, and it hurt their businesses. So, you have to be a little nimble on some of the circumstances surrounding certain things, and, kind of be collaborative in how you do that. But at the end of the day, you are going to hold them to a compromise, or, what's in the condition of those permits.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, Madam Mayor, I think this would be an appropriate time to have public comment. I think the city clerk is passing out public comment that was received via email that will not be read aloud, but will be presented to the council for consideration.
Okay, and then we do, I'm sure, have in-person public comment?
We do, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so for the record, we have 9 comments that we received via email. Like the city manager stated, I will not be reading them aloud, but they will be entered into the record. So for our in-person comments, we'll start off with Jim Randall. And I'd like to remind everybody that your comments are limited to 3 minutes, please.
Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council staff, let me first say that I'm not against cannabis. I'm kind of the same position as Councilman Welty is. I've been to some of these dispensaries. They're very well run. Where my concern is security outside. I heard you talking about armed security outside the business. We're kind of unique the way we're built in the town center. And I think that might create a bigger problem than help the problem. I'm not concerned about the security inside the building. I think it'll be fine. The biggest reason my concern is 4 incidents that happened here in the town center. The first one was an incident prior to a council meeting where our city manager saw, and our city attorney saw 2 gentlemen exit the backside towards the golf course with 2 what appeared to be AR-15s. Sheriff was called, no one ever responded. Another incident, fight in front of the lodge on Father's Day. Took an hour for a sheriff to show up. We had an incident that I personally witnessed in the parking lot, very young people, I don't think any of them were 21, passing a stick around. I'm sure it wasn't a vape. When the sheriff started to come into the parking lot, they walked over to someone's mother's SUV that they got to borrow that night and made it look like they're getting in it. As soon as that sheriff cleared that parking lot, doors were slammed and they're ready to party. There was a blacked-out SUV sitting next to it. You couldn't see who was in it, but they had a lot of conversation back and forth. When called, dispatch wanted to know where the town center was in Canyon Lake. No one ever, all we wanted was the sheriff to come back through the parking lot and see what was going on. Never happened. Felony assault that happened just recently, 25 minutes to respond. Until we get our security outside cleaned up, we're not in a position, I don't think, we're a family community. Most cities have their dispensaries, like the Lieutenant Center, in a commercial industrial area. Not where kids hang out. Wildemar, I looked at the one dispensaries down there, I was not aware there was two. There's a distance between the housing and where that's at. It's not right across the street. There's quite a bit of a difference there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Randall.
Next, we have Chris Poland.
I do want to remind everyone that we do have a 3-minute limitation that was set in our council protocol, and I don't want to cut anyone off or be rude, but we do have a lot of people who do want to make comments tonight. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to address you. I am a resident of Canyon Lake. I'm here to ask you to approve the introduction and first reading of the ordinance 215 related to commercial cannabis businesses. My family has used cannabis for medical purposes, a very important purpose. Since it was legalized, I can testify to its welcome benefits with virtually no side effects. We obtained it through the mail as we're not interested in visiting any of the dispensaries in our surrounding communities. We believe that it's most appropriate to have a dispensary in a convenient, safe, and secure location, such as our own town center. The ordinance appears to be very comprehensive and is quite restrictive. I appreciate the need for safety and security and hope that the ordinance is consistent with the other businesses in our city. I don't think it should be more restrictive. I believe that permitting cannabis dispensary will be a welcome addition to our city, and like any new retail business, one that comes with considerable economic benefit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment real quick?
No, I'm sorry, you have to wait for a public comment.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Gary Bradford.
Madam Mayor, council people, I too am in favor of you guys passing this ordinance. I come from a very anti-drug background. Myself, I've never tried marijuana. I'm not going to try it with shop opens either. Myself, it's just not my thing. But I spent 33 years on the fire department, been on a lot of different calls. Marijuana was never a big deal. You get into other kind of drugs, that's something else. But marijuana never really caused us a lot of problems in my employment. And I think it's legal. I think it would be unconscionable for us as a city not to open up a shop in here and take the tax monies, the revenues that we would have available to us when we have all these other problems and we have such a small amount of tax and revenue money coming in already. I think it's a great opportunity for us, and it's not going to change a bit how many people in our community are using marijuana, how many people are doing whatever, because they can get it. They're getting it right now, right next door. I think it's not any different than counties in the south that are dry counties on one day, and you have to go to the next county to buy booze, so all they're doing is shifting their revenues over to that other county to buy alcohol. Same thing here. We can't turn down the money. We need it for the new fire department. You need it to help pay for our police services and everything else. I think it would be silly for us to pass this opportunity up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Rich Moline.
Well, I didn't know that we would eventually get here. It has taken a very long time, needless to say, but I do appreciate the tenacity of the previous city council and this city council to get us to this point, and clearly, as you well know, I am in favor of passing this ordinance. Should not be a shock. One of the things that has really been amazing to me, and I think, and with the other discussions, is that we all, myself included, kind of believed this item would raise significant controversy, backlash. And although certainly not everyone agrees with legal cannabis here in the city of Canyon Lake, after meeting with hundreds and hundreds of Canyon Lake residents, and many of them filled out the surveys, we haven't had that type of backlash. Our meetings have been virtually 100% in favor. Perhaps tonight there will be people speak against. But I think the reality is that the timing is now. Although the legal cannabis industry is still young, we are at the time that the infrastructure, the software applications, enough licensed distributors are positioned to handle our customers' needs safely and efficiently. The city council, by taking this step of legalizing cannabis in Canyon Lake, is the largest step, but it is just a step taken to ensure our financial stability so we can continue to survive as a city and prosper. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jack Walmsley.
Welcome.
Madam Mayor and council members, I definitely support the progress of having the marijuana type business to give us some money, but a couple of things that kind of popped up. First of all, the survey that you took of 300 people out of 12 to 15,000 people is not a very good survey. I don't really code with that. Second thing, with reference to the code that's been written, we're writing a 30-page code with reference to do this, do that, and so on. You're not doing that for other businesses. You're not doing that for the people that are serving liquor that cause just as much of a problem. So I would recommend we kind of check that. It's a little heavy. The other thing is home delivery. Definitely don't do that because you have no control of the age of the person. It's like delivering a pizza. So home delivery, I would vote no on that, and that way we can control that it stay out of the younger people. The other thing is with reference to choosing a company, you might want to consider picking a committee. That way it takes the pressure off of the council. There could be a 7-board committee representing everybody in the community and letting them talk with the company. And then if the company is decided upon, it's not all falling on your shoulders. And I've been on your shoulders a few times. The other item I have is the quality of the product. That is extremely important. There's a lot of products that are almost like poison. So you have to make sure that the company that you pick is going to present a quality product. The quality product, for instance, one of the best is in Northern California. The other one's up in Canada. You say, well, why do I watch that? Well, I have stock in the companies. And I can guarantee you that the corporations don't produce good stuff, so take the effort to get the good stuff. I don't use it, but when you get to be 90 years old, what the hell?
Thank you, Jack.
The last card I have is our anonymous speaker.
Welcome.
Okay, I'm not part of Canyon Lake. I live in Canyon Hills. My thing is all the voting places are closed. Tomorrow is Election Day. How come every place in the city is closed? That was my question.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
How come every voting place in the city is closed when Election Day is tomorrow?
Yeah, so the county closes at 5 o'clock. They'll be open tomorrow at 7 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m. City
But a lot
Hall,
of people don't get off work till 5 o'clock.
that's it.
So pretty much they don't want you to vote?
That's a question for the county.
Corruption, corruption, corruption. And I didn't know I was walking into a cannabis meeting. You're talking to somebody who got falsely accused of doing marijuana. I've never smoked marijuana before in my life. So the laws, whatever the laws are on that, I don't care. I just care about voting because I want my voice to get out there.
Yeah, so just to clarify, you're here, it's 6:56 right now. If you came tomorrow at this time, they would still be open. They're open until 8 p.m. tomorrow.
But what about the people that have to work? Do you see what I'm saying? It
Madam-
sounds to me like they don't want people to vote because they don't want to get the corrupt politicians out of this state. Thank
Mayor?
you.
Okay, okay. Never mind, Mayor.
No, we have one more. Madam Mayor, we do have one additional card. So Kim Cousins, please.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Welcome. And it's great seeing you, Mayor Castillo, and council members and
Yes, it's on.
and citizens of
Yes.
Canyon Lake. I am representing the syndicate, and so I am a partner in that organization. We'll have 11 locations shortly, so there's 8 locations in LA County through Lake Elsinore. The 3 that are coming online will be Desert Hot Springs, Long Beach, and Lake Elsinore Location 2. So very actively involved in the industry, helped to develop the policy for the city of Lake Elsinore. I want to assure you from a health standpoint that the Bureau of Cannabis Control is very serious about health consequences with lab testing of all products. So what you get in the backyard or in the trunk, who knows, but everything that's in a legal dispensary has been tested and certified for efficacy. A couple points in your policy, which I do appreciate, 420 ordinance. It's very nice. But on page 9 of 34, that ordinance specifically talks about the security plan. One of the things I did request the city of Lake Elsinore is to take that security plan and put it under a client confidential package, just because what we're doing to secure the facility, our employees and our customers, we don't want it discoverable as a public record. So we took that outside of the application process and set it to the side. We've been in operation in Lake Elsinore for 23 months in an industrial complex. The security of that facility has improved immensely. As anybody who's operating a dispensary, there's cameras everywhere. And so what used to be kind of chaos in the evening with homeless individuals or tweakers breaking into local businesses doesn't occur because there is 24/7 camera and physical security on the property. So that's a huge improvement, I would say, that you're going to look forward to seeing with anybody that you select. But I would encourage, obviously, that you just look at that ordinance and specifically think about the renewal process is the other thing. This is a huge investment. And as you mentioned, from a financial standpoint, it could take 18 months to develop the property and the TIs to get operational, and then you have a 1-year license. Most of the other communities have a 5 or 10-year renewable license. It's still up annually for review, and you can be revoked, but some sense of security relative to that investment that you have an opportunity to come back and get a 2nd or 3rd year license would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Marvin, is it Wester?
Welcome.
I appreciate the report from the Sheriff's Department. My understanding, if it was correct, was that this was report on behaviors and surrounding the pot shops. And I did some research before and found a study by the research at the University of Colorado, Denver. This appeared in the Justice Quarterly, a publication of the Academy of Criminal Justice Science. They found that neighborhoods, not just 100, 200 feet from the pot shop, but neighborhoods with one or more medical or recreational dispensary saw increased crime rates that were between 26 and they went up to even 1,000% higher than in neighborhoods without commercial marijuana activities. In their study, the researchers looked at both medical and recreational dispensaries from 2012 to 2015. Colorado legalized marijuana in 2014. They examined the extent to which dispensaries were associated with neighborhood crime, disorder, independently of other characteristics of the neighborhood. Measures of crime and disorder were drawn from the Denver Police Department, included aggravated assault, theft, burglary, drug and alcohol offenses, public disorder, robbery. Measures of other neighborhood characteristics were based on the 213 estimates of crime in the area. The study found that except for murder, the presence of at least one medical marijuana dispensary was associated with significant increase in neighborhood crime and disorder. The study also found a relative strong association between medical marijuana dispensaries and drug and alcohol offenses, so just something to consider. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Madam Mayor, excuse me, I have no further cards. However, I would like to read the names of the people who submitted comments electronically. We received comments from Tracy McClelland, William Van Vliet, Leilani Hongola, Christy Lester, Eric Karsgård, Don Haggerty, Jen Segar, Valerie Norris, and Brian Snedeker. Thank you.
Okay. And no additional public comment at this time? Going once? Can we?
Thank you. If I can just, you can make your comment, if I can just have you fill out a card afterwards and then submit it to me. Go ahead, make your comment.
Hi. Thank you for hearing my last-minute voice. I just felt like I had to say something. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and all the council members. I'm against having it in the town center. I'm not against dispensaries in other areas. I actually have arthritis very badly, and I've used topical, and it has worked for me. But honestly, our community, you have to look at why we live here, not at the money that you can bring in, the revenue. There's a price to be paid for every decision you guys make. And I just want you to know that as a public member, I moved here for a reason. There's security. It's a community of all ages. We have elderly, we have small children, and we have an itty-bitty town center that we all use. So if we have a dispensary there, it's just one more item that brings us down to a Paris level. Sorry about anybody that's from Paris, but that's why I don't live there. And I don't live in Lake Elsinore for the same reason. So when you want to rise above as a community, take yourselves into consideration cities like Claremont. Yes, it may be conservative, but there's a lot of liberals there, but you don't see any dispensaries there because they know what it can bring to their community. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you.
No further comments, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
Okay, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
So the recommendation from staff on this is simply that the city council receive the information. We don't have any speaker cards for.
Can you?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we?
Most of us have never been to a meeting.
Okay. Well, let's take a brief 5-minute recess. If you want to fill out a speaker card, now is the time to do it.
We have blue speaker cards on the back counter. We're going to take a 5-minute recess, as the mayor mentioned. Please fill out your cards and submit them to me, and then when we return, we'll hear the remainder of the comments.
We do want to hear from anyone who's interested tonight. It's your opportunity.
Madam Mayor, the time, please.
is 7:04.
Okay. Bang, bang, bang.
Bang, bang, bang. Okay. 7:12. Back in session, back on the record, whatever it's called.
All right, so we have some additional public comment cards. We're going to start with Sharon. And again, just a reminder, 3-minute limit, please.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Sharon. I've lived here 36 years, and I'm not for having her around here because over the years, I have seen stuff already, and I think for younger teenagers and people that get it, it's not good for them. And I've had kids in the big trees behind my house by the dam that met there for months, and we called the police, and they didn't get there in time, but they are back in there smoking pot and everything. So one day when I was walking, I thought, I'm gonna go down there and look in those trees. And they had a table set up in there and some chairs and everything else. And I've walked by the park on Village Way and seeing teenagers sitting there smoking the pot things, and they try and hide it when you come by. And I think that it's just too convenient for them or for them to have somebody buy it for them. And I moved here 36 years ago because of the family community. I've raised my 5 kids and 13 grandkids. And I think it's more of a family thing, and I think we need to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have W.J. Lockman.
I'm mine reader.
Madam Mayor,
Welcome.
member of the council, I'm opposed to the ordinance. I like what we got very much. I wish you would leave it there for at least 10 more years. And should you approve the ordinance, I'm prepared to work hard to go through the referendum process to remove it. I've been in Monterey, I've been in Canyon Lake for over 20 years. So I've been around, and I like the community. I like the community very well.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jeff Bill.
Welcome.
Council, thank you. I wasn't prepared to speak tonight, but I wanted to bring up a couple of issues that I saw. We all recognize there's a school over here. The school is for troubled youth. The school helps kids recover from substance abuse, gang-related activities, family issues, different things along those lines. I've met with some of the alumni from this school. My church sponsors this school, and they do a great job. These kids are getting their act together, going on to college, going to trade schools, putting families back together. Putting something over here, I'm not trying to be a smartass, but that's like putting a candy store in front of a starving diabetic. You're not gonna do well with these kids over there. I don't really see how the priority of money takes place over a child's life. Something that I think you guys should consider. The other issue with the security, I do have a law enforcement background from years ago. With security, are you looking at just people with guard cards and a gun permit? You're looking at people that are post-certified. There's a big difference there. Security in the parking lot versus security in the store, those are two different things. People are not gonna start smoking this stuff in the store. They're gonna go elsewhere, like to the trees by her house, to the parking lot over by the lodge. Security in the parking lot is gonna be very critical. I would suggest that you look at post-certified security officers. Those are just a few things I want to bring up. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
Our last card is by Tim Cook.
Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you guys for putting this on. I am the old days, what you'd call a medical marijuana card holder. It has worked well for different parts of my medical life. I am in support of it from that area. I have two comments about just two different areas that show me concern. One is the limitation of just one dispensary. I think it would be kind of a monopoly, and I don't think that's really proper. There should be at least two, just in my opinion. And the second thing is with the distance, I do agree there should be distance from churches and schools, if you call it libraries, whatever you have. But we also have to be careful that we go too far. Our town center is pretty small. We're going to all of a sudden say, we're making this law legal, but you can't go anywhere in our town because our limitations are so far. So that's really the only two comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have no further cards.
Okay. Well, let's have some council discussion. Who wants to start? Really? No one?
I'll jump in, because I think it's, obviously, this is a community interest, because you're here. This is one of our largest audience we've had in a few weeks. And I do have, I'm not a cannabis user, never have, but I have friends that do. And there are, I think we brought up the legal side from the legal grower, which is the goal of the state of California as the state of Colorado, is to eliminate the illegal supply chain because it feeds other things that are contributed to crime and other drugs. So I did a lot of research to the state of Washington, the state of Colorado. They were well ahead of California before we legalized. California learned a lot from those two states of the mistakes that they made on the regulatory side, on the control side, and on the financial side. So the state of California did a lot of work researching how to best regulate this industry and go after the illegal side, which our law enforcement partners are working on, DEA is working on every day. They're taking down illegal growers everywhere. I think from a standpoint, from a realistic standpoint, for those who may or may not know, marijuana is going in the gate via vehicle right now. Home deliveries are happening daily. And anyone that's in that business or has use will have an app on their phone, and it's that simple. One of the things as a council member, I have to look at the safety of the community, safety of our schools, what fits for our community and what may not. Also have to look at the other side. How best do we do on the financial side from a revenue? How do we support the city services? How do we keep our safety component intact? That includes the law enforcement and fire, because we have a very limited tax base. One of the concerns I have is that we are limited. But one of the positives I have with this particular issue is that due to the way that the state has structured local control, it gives us a lot of leverage and latitude on how contracts are writ, how safety and security issues are met, how distancing is, and it also gives us an annual review process to yank that conditional use permit if it doesn't comply with our local regulations if we had them in place. My concern as a local community is the state of California is aggressively moving forward with trying to take over the entire industry and taking away local control. If that happens, then we'll have a very mute voice on whether it happens or not in our community. So I think from our standpoint, from me as a council member, I would rather have control of it than let it happen haphazardly or it comes in a different way. So I really appreciate the input from the community, from you here tonight. I've spoken to many people in the community as well as my colleagues here. And we do get a variety of opinions, and that's what is good about Canyon Lake, because we are a diverse community, we have diverse opinions. So I look at this issue as a very sensitive issue, but it's a very practical issue too. Cannabis today is legal. It is legal in the state of California, it is legal in Arizona, it is legal in most of this, there's 37 states that it's legal in now. It's like us having prohibition on alcohol or limiting the number of drinking establishments we have in our place. The statistics that our communities that we've looked at aren't showing the crime rates that most of us have reflected. The ones that have high crime rates are usually, they have high crime rates no matter what. They've got multiple violations of firearms, knives, robberies, and it kind of reflects that poorly on the community, but the ones that you have seen that have the most difficulties are the communities that already are having a large law enforcement problem. We do not experience that here. And I think from my standpoint, with the controls and the checks in the system, which have to be very stringent to make sure that we keep our community safe, and with the review process, I think it at least sets up some checks and balances for our local control. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. That was very well stated. Do you have anything to add? Or do you want to wait? Okay. You're formulating your thought process.
I'll go. I came to Canyon Lake. I have two sons that were born here. The one's 33, so he's been through the whole road, and I have one that's 14 that's been partway down the road, and I raised them totally different. The 33-year-old, great kid, greatest person you never met, but he was in Canyon Lake, and he spent a lot of time just running around the neighborhoods like a neighborhood, and what he saw, what he observed as far as the level of alcohol and cannabis that was running through the community was just amazing. And now at 33, he comes back and just tells me how unbelievable it is, or it was when he was growing up. It was just not a great place to raise a kid when you let him run the streets. Just was terrible. I have a 14-year-old. I would say he is out of adult supervision, and not counting when he's at home playing video games. He's out of adult supervision about 2 hours a week at the most. I mean, he's part of it's him. He doesn't want to go out to there. He's very happy in his world, and we keep him very active in sports and very engaged. And we've kept him from all that environment. And I'm concerned that Canyon Lake does not give a great image for our children to be in. And the cannabis added to the center, it won't help. It won't help. I think there's a story, and if you all know the myth of Midas, right? And I always wanted to be Hercules, but you know what? Midas looked pretty good. He could go out and he could touch things and turn things into gold, right? Really magical. I said, I could live with being Midas. And at the end of the story, he touches his whole family, and his family is basically dead. So are we going to go for the gold at the risk of our children? And that is the heart of my concern. So, and that being said, and maybe there is a way to meet in the middle and provide the cannabis and make sure that our children aren't exposed. There may be that middle, but we need to make sure absolutely that whatever we do, our children are protected. And I hear things like, well, it'll be difficult for the cannabis to actually accommodate that protection of the children. And my bottom line is, I don't care how difficult it is for the cannabis people to protect our children. You do what you do to protect our children, or, don't work here, or, don't open your shop here. And if nobody wants to open their shop here and put some priority on our children, I'm good. We don't need them. But if one or two people want to come in and really make that their priority, maybe we have a conversation. That's kind of my position.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
My turn, Joy. A lot of good discussion tonight. I can't thank each and every one of you for coming out and being a part of this meeting. This topic has been going on for quite some time throughout Canyon Lake. For me, I take this job very seriously. A lot of you know me as the guy who went door to door, and I did that with this exact ordinance. And for me, the polling wasn't enough, so my wife and I took to the streets and we knocked on the doors. We had a lot of interesting conversations with folks, and the number one thing that came back was just the location. Canyon Lake's a unique community. We only have 3 places that we can put this. That was the main concern. It wasn't marijuana. Most people don't care. Most people know that California, it's allowed and it's not an issue. It's just the uniqueness of what is Canyon Lake. And that's the real issue of concern, I think. I'm only one vote, and I know that if this council decides to move forward with this ordinance, that we're going to write it in a way that, in my mind, protects the community. But that's my concern is it still comes back to the one location, the ability to be able to drive your golf cart to it, the traffic, all the things that, citizens have told me and come forth. The tax revenue is so needed in Canyon Lake, and I think most of us in this room know that. It is so needed for our city to keep moving forward. I just wish we had a different model. I wish that we didn't block ourselves out when we established in 1990 and made ourselves so small so we wouldn't be under the predicament we are tonight. But unfortunately, that's what's before us. And as policymakers, we need to make policy that is going to help communities such as ours and push us in the right direction. But for me, the number one priority is safety, and it always has been. So when I look at this particular ordinance, my biggest concern is location. My biggest concern is obviously what Canyon Lakers have told me, And for those of you who are watching online and those of you that are here in the audience, I can't thank you enough for all the instant messages on Facebook, all the text messages that I received today, the emails, the phone calls. I asked you last week to participate, and you did just that. So for me, it helps me make my decision tonight based upon the feedback that I've received from the community. And I know this is a hot button topic, which is why I'm going to be as transparent as I can with the information that I've received. For me, my wife and I, we knocked on just over 200 doors, and that information is about 65% not in favor of it. Again, not because of marijuana, but just simply because of the location. Their comments back to me, the people that I've knocked on and had conversations at their door, was, Jeremy, we get the tax benefit, we understand that's a need, but my concern is my kids. And maybe that's why most people in the community reached out to me, because I'm a young council member with 2 kids, and they felt comfortable telling me their story about raising their family here and the concerns that it brings. So for me, that's my only concern. And the other side of it is, as a business owner myself, it's a tough decision because I know this will help the city. And I think we could use the resources to provide better public safety. I think we could use the funds and the money to help with our fire department. And that's a decision that this council is going to have to make. So I'm excited to see what my colleagues have to say as well.
Hey, Ronnie?
Okay. Very, very torn on the different information that we've received. I appreciate everybody coming to talk to us and the people that have emailed. It seems that the general, kind of the biggest concern about this is a family community. We've got lots of kids. We don't want that element in this community. To kind of counter that is the regulations and all the restrictions that are put into it. I understand the concern about having minors have access to it, but with the way all the regulations are written, there's no access to anyone under 21. And IDs have to be checked, whether it's in the store or delivered. That's part of the delivery process. So there's a lot of processes that have, and policies that are in effect to help prevent those items. Other big concern, like everybody's, is the town center. If that's the location where it would be, it's a lot of families go there. There's a lot of different types of retail stores in there, and what, does that bring a questionable group of people to the town center? Again, with the security, we've got a lot of areas that are addressed by the ordinance. And then I think finally, as Jeremy said, as a representative of the city, I've got to look at the financial aspects of it. And based on the information from HDL, there could be very large gains for the city, and there's a lot we can do with those funds. So there's a lot of things to consider. And again, I appreciate everybody coming out and voicing their opinions. It's very helpful.
Thank you. And I would just like to echo my colleagues. We did seek out feedback. We've tried to make ourselves available in terms of email, face-to-face, text message, phone calls, and I do appreciate all of that feedback that I personally have received. In order to formulate my decision, I did visit a handful of dispensaries, and I saw things that pleasantly surprised me, things that I took note of in terms of security measures, things that I saw would definitely not fit well in Canyon Lake, and things that I thought could be potentials. I also have the, benefit from my regular job of speaking to law enforcement throughout the state. And I was able to sit down with different police chiefs, to include one that originally was adamantly opposed to marijuana in his city, but has 73 stores there, and ask him how that works in their city, how that benefits the city, and what law enforcement issues they encounter. So I do feel like this council has endeavored to definitely educate ourselves in order to make this decision. And as you can hear, none of us are taking this decision lightly. I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old myself, and like all of you, don't want to live somewhere that is not Canyon Lake. So I do appreciate the quality of life we have here, as well as the atmosphere in which that quality is provided. I'm also considering the additional funding that would be available to add police personnel, to add fire department personnel, if we undertake this. Because as you've heard tonight, there has been some concerns about the response times from the sheriff's department. And I do think that we do have a hardship because we are very limited in our police personnel. To that end, hiring police is expensive, and we do need to pay for that somehow. I also am very interested to see what types of community benefits are available. We did have some information at some of the coffee meetings that I've hosted, where I've been provided with information from other consultants to the effect of not just flat rate or percentage monetary investments, but investments in infrastructure, roads. I mean, I would love to see a bridge go across Railroad Canyon. I don't know how much that is. But those kinds of things I'm taking into consideration when we talk about the quality of life and what could be provided in a restricted partnership. So those are the things that I'm considering. I did appreciate the comments about post-certified security. I do agree with you that there's measures difference there. So those are the things that I'm considering. Anyone else have a final thought? Hearing none.
I have a little one. We talked about a couple of things in the statute that I'm uncomfortable with. The library not being included, the church not being included in the language, the distances from the children activity locations. I don't really know what the out is. If we put it, we're going down a risky road. That's the bottom line. We don't know the outcome. With the optimistic picture says we got all this money and there's never a problem, and it's not going to create any problems in the community. And then the other picture is that maybe we get some big problems. So if that big problem does happen in our community, how do we end it quickly? I don't see that in the writing. Maybe I'm missing something. But what's our out? And I think we kind of need one. And so that's my thing. There's all in the statute, as you're moving ahead, it's not a statute, it's a ordinance. There, thank you. But there's some things that I think aren't adequate.
So to address the first point, the city council is free to amend the ordinance in front of you. If you want to talk about specific provisions and give direction on those amendments, we can absolutely do that. If you're looking at the addition of library, very common, parks, another common one, that absolutely can be looked at and done. In terms of your out, the regulatory ordinances are good for 1 year. So unlike some communities that allow cannabis businesses through land use entitlements, which run with the land, generally in perpetuity, sometimes under a development agreement for a set amount of time. These are year-to-year regulatory agreements. If the city council at a future date said, you know what, we're out, we're done, the city council would have the ability, under this ordinance, to pull the permits and stop the program. Now, I anticipate that would lead to potentially some litigation against the city if it went down that road. But I have no doubt that the city would prevail based on how we've written the ordinance and put it together. So those are my thoughts on that. In addition, there's nothing under the language of the ordinance that obligates the city to issue permits if the ordinance was repealed before the permitting process went through.
Madam Mayor, if I may?
Yes.
Can I make a suggestion, and City Attorney, work with me on this one? As I speak this thought, can we take up the idea of candidacy separate, if this council wants to move forward with it, and then go ahead and talk about the logistics of the ordinance? That way, we get a sense of if my colleagues want to move forward or not.
Certainly, I mean, if you wanted to make a motion just for, getting a sense of the will of the council, one of the options was to table the ordinance.
Right.
If you had a majority to do that, that would give you a sense pretty quick. Or you could just, say generally, who's in favor of proceeding forward and wants to begin doing amendments. That'd be an acceptable motion to make.
Yeah.
I think I've probably been in this community probably more than most. I've been here over 40 years, so I've seen a lot of growth. But one of the things I want you to be cautious about is equating the use of alcohol and drugs as related to either any of our establishments that their kids are going in and buying alcohol and then taking it across the street. It's not being provided that way. The same thing is happening with your substances, other substances, marijuana or anything else. The problems that Councilman Welty has talked about has been going on for years. Even today, the kids are migrating to certain places in our community to seek out those things that they want to do, which is usually not what we consider appropriate. But I think it's unfair to equate a cannabis establishment with that potential behavior, because by the regulations, by the way they check their IDs, I'm not saying somebody can't go in and buy it for them, don't get me wrong. But probably what you're finding those kids are using is illegal marijuana. They're buying it from off the street, they're buying it from friends. So we're talking about legalized, as well as our stores that sell alcohol, as well as our bars that sell alcohol. So it's a different equation. And one of the things that I'm very cognizant of is to make sure that we have the steps in place that if we go ahead and say that we're going to move forward with it, is that we also have the ability to DC it. In other words, stop it. And I think we can do that in many ways with conditional use permits and other things that we put into the regulations, as well as the things that we do with our other establishments that may be starting to create a higher crime rate because of alcohol and other things. So we work very closely with our code and our zoning, but I want to separate legal and illegal and behavioral problems that the kids are having and not relate that to that dispensary. However, whether that dispensary or whether that establishment sells alcohol, the kids are probably not getting it from there. So.
Okay. Councilmember Dane.
Thank you. More of a question than anything, but could we put in the ordinance where it needed to go? For example, if we wanted to say it needed to go to Eastport instead of the town center? I know there's logistical areas there, but is that something that we could do?
So generally speaking, my advice to the council is to use zoning and locational buffers to indicate where the businesses can go. There's an obvious nexus between, those buffers and the zoning. Whereas when we start picking and choosing specific properties, we start getting into a riskier legal environment. The reason I bring that up is because I litigated a case against an ordinance that did that. They picked the properties by APN, and they said, we want to be very clear about where these go. It goes here, 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 here. And that ordinance was ruled by the Court of Appeal to be invalid. And so generally speaking, I'd recommend going in the direction of zoning and then locational restrictions. If, as Councilmember Welty mentioned, if there were specific additional locational restrictions that you were concerned about, then those can certainly be added. When it comes to Eastport, just speaking generally, from a zoning perspective, there's problems there as well, just like with the town center. Eastport backs up to residential properties. Eastport has a really serious parking and traffic issue. If you had a very popular dispensary, it might be very difficult to mitigate those issues in that location.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm trying to reconcile what would work best in whichever way we go. But I do appreciate the comments that Councilmember Green said about separating the legal versus illegal. I think that's important when we're considering this.
Councilmember Welty, did you want to add something?
I just want to say, I agree with Councilman Green, is I don't think the kids that are smoking it are getting it from dispensaries. They've been getting it long before. They've been getting it for 30, 40, 50 years without the dispensary, so, yeah. So the amount of dispensary cannabis that makes it to the kids is probably going to be fairly small. So it's more the idea that now we're a cannabis town, it's a party town, and that's what makes me nervous, and how that will affect our kids in our community. Say, oh, everything's okay. Well, it's not okay for a kid to smoke marijuana when his mind is maturing. Or I don't like the idea of a kid seeing cannabis as a winning, successful plan for his high school, piece of his high school success plan. So all that bothers me. And when we start seeing it advertised, openly and wantonly, I'm exaggerating, of course, it's not good. That doesn't mean that, again, whether there's a dispensary here or not, I can tell, I think the kids aren't going to miss a beat as far as their supply.
Okay, going back to what the Mayor Pro Tem suggested, and I believe, let me restate this and see if I'm right. What you would like to do is make a motion to potentially approve an ordinance and then take up stipulations on the ordinance thereafter.
Yeah, so I think we're having two conversations. The first is if we collectively can agree that we want to move forward with an ordinance like this, not this particular one, but an ordinance like this, that it would really help the conversation move a lot quicker if we took a poll or a gauge or a roll call vote, I would prefer, on moving forward with the idea of taking up an ordinance. And then we can go ahead and go back and forth on the ordinance and what that's going to look like and what we do and don't want. But at least we're all on the same page that we want to move forward with it, or we don't want to move forward with it and there's no discussion on the ordinance.
So almost in the form of a straw poll.
Absolutely.
Just to see if you want to even proceed.
Correct.
With going through the incredibly fun process of amending a 34-page.
So I don't think an emotion or a second's really required. I think a roll call on a straw vote would just suffice, if I'm right.
Yeah, it's not binding, it's not giving direction. I think
Absolutely.
If the mayor just wants to call for a roll call on whether to proceed, that's fine.
A straw roll call.
Straw it up.
All right, so I'm going to do a roll call, and then council members, you're going to respond with yes or no, you want to proceed or not, okay? Councilmember Dane.
Yes.
Councilmember Green.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith.
No.
Councilmember Welty.
No.
Mayor Castillo.
Yes.
Okay, so we have 3 yeses and 2 nos.
Now the fun begins.
Oh my God. No. Okay.
Question, was the ordinance put on first reading?
We have not done that yet. Okay, so now.
Well, I guess we have a number of options here. You have a draft ordinance in front of you. We can just focus on those things that individual council members would like to see different or added to this ordinance. Maybe we don't need to go word for word, page by page through this long ordinance. But if there are areas of concern in the ordinance, maybe members of the council could bring those up, and staff could address those and clarify whether or not it's contained in the ordinance, or we can certainly add it if it's the will of the council.
Who has their list? Are you ready? All right. So my understanding is these will be direction for a new first reading at a different time.
No.
We can amend it now.
You can amend it now if you want.
Okay.
Or you could ask that the amendments be brought back. Either way is fine.
Okay.
Well, then, I think one of the things that I think is important to us is the distancing requirements and the spelling out of what we would consider churches.
If I could ask those in the audience who are leaving to please do so quietly, the meeting is continuing. Thank you.
Because I.
Hold on. Thanks. Okay, go ahead.
I believe that we can be more restrictive than the 600-foot rule, is that correct?
You could absolutely be more restrictive than the 600-foot rule. I would simply caution the council that if you put it at 600 feet or you went beyond 600 feet with the size of the town center, I'm not certain you would have any parcels that were still qualified to operate.
Okay, what about then the designation of occupancies? As Dale pointed out, the library, the school, or the church. I guess I don't know how, if we roll that in, is the church considered a school?
Yes. Well, the church operates a school.
Okay, so then they would fall into that category.
Well, I would say, in the terms is that we can add the word church to this.
Yes.
And say, hey, we're not going to debate whether it's a church or a school. We're simply going to say that church is someplace that is somewhere children visit regularly. So I think we had, the two discussions was the library and the church. I think they both should be included in that section of what should be considered children activities.
And my question is does the grandfather clause exist in this format, considering the cannabis will be there, and now a church wants to come there, and they can't because...
So that's a good point. So how this works is, when the application comes in, that is the point in time in which we determine whether sensitive uses exist or not, right? So is for example, a school adjacent to the parcel that you've selected. If a marijuana or cannabis dispensary goes in, there's nothing prohibiting a school from subsequently coming in after them. The cannabis dispensary wouldn't be disqualified from operating. Because at that point, the school's making an informed decision. That, they know it's there. And they can't essentially force this business to close by setting up shop next door.
Okay.
So that's the point in time where we say, and that's why we do that zoning verification letter that we were talking about in the pre-application. That is the snapshot where we say what sensitive uses are here, what zoning is here. You're either clear or you're not.
Okay. And then, just for edification, it's going to be church, not the church, because we all know what church we're talking about, but.
So, in zoning parlance, we used to say church, now we say religious facility. And so we would recommend adding to section 4.20.250A2, that's where the list of sensitive uses are. If we wanted to add D, which is religious facilities, and then add E, which is libraries, that could certainly be done.
How do we do that right now? Just put those two things in. Do we need a motion and a?
I think we can just say libraries and religious facilities. We know what you mean. When it comes time to do your motion, you're going to do it as amended.
Okay.
The city clerk is, I'm sure, taking excellent notes of the sections that I'm citing, so that it'll be included in the motion and the minutes.
So I believe it should be amended to say that, yes.
Just for clarification, library, religious facility, and did we want to include school as well?
School's already there.
School's there.
School's already there. My question is are we keeping the 600 feet?
You don't have 600 feet in the draft ordinance in front of you.
Right.
You have
I know that's been
adjacent.
point of conversation, so I guess that would be for my colleagues, is the 600-foot rule in effect? I know that the city attorney has advised us to be careful because we might put us in a bind in regards to even doing business. But currently, we have a library on one side of the town center. We have a church on the complete opposite side of the town center, which is not even remotely close to 600 feet. So my question is a 600-foot feasible in the town center? Should it be 300? Should it be 400?
I don't, do we need to even put a, if we identify the facilities that we.
Councilman, your mic.
I think if we identify the facilities versus this footage, gives us the latitude based on the zoning and planning of how to work it, but we won't be locked in at 600 or at 700 or whatever. But if we say school, we say church, or religious.
Generally speaking, when it comes to a sensitive use buffer, you have to do both. So you have to say the facility, and then you have to say the distance.
Because if we just identify locations, what do we care? We got to say it's within a certain amount from that location.
And staff's recommendation and the language in the ordinance says adjacent to. So there's no distance. As long as there is some buffer between the dispensary and that sensitive use. I think the problem with the town center is that it's small, and the opportunities in terms of vacancy in the center are so incredibly limited that if we start just kind of making up a number, okay, we're not going to do 600 feet, let's do 300 feet, we're just kind of making up a number that's arbitrary, the opportunity for a dispensary may arise in a location that's 5 feet too close, and then are we going to have a situation where we've got, I don't know. So I think staff's recommendation was to just use that term adjacent to kind of, and then identify the uses.
Mr. City Attorney, just to clarify, the whole 600-foot thing, it's not just a made-up number, right?
No.
That's what I thought. So we are talking about an
state law.
actual state law number on what other jurisdictions take on.
So that's the default under state law.
Okay.
The city gets to move it up, move it down.
Right.
Generally speaking, I've written cannabis regulatory ordinances for larger communities that have, a shopping center or a commercial area that is as big as Canyon Lake is. So, you can find a place there that's 600 feet from this and 1,000 feet from that. When we were doing this in Hemet a couple months ago, we had to use GIS to create maps that actually showed the sensitive use buffers so that people, because, there's so many properties. As you said, we're a unique community here. We know what we're looking at. We're in it right now. And so, the caution is purely one of, we have a small town center. And if we went with 600, my sense was that it would severely limit the available opportunities, which would limit the number of applicants. Because remember, in order to apply, you have to be able to show that you have property that you can use, which would limit the negotiating power of the city manager. I mean, if you are competing against one other person, or are you competing against 5 people to provide the best community benefits? And so I think that was the general logic. But as I said in the PowerPoint, it is a policy decision. Like, if this council wants to say, we're looking at a bigger buffer, you can. I just want to make sure that I caution you that if you do that, I don't know if you're going to get any applications. I don't know if you're going to have any properties that actually qualify.
Yeah, we'd like to leave some opportunity here. I mean, I would not like the kid going to church to walk by the dispensary. I don't think the family going to church wants their child there, or going to the library. I don't think there should be sense that they've got to put their blinders over their kids' eyes or walking from the car to these things. So I think 600 feet's probably a long ways, and that probably unnecessary. But next door, here, Johnny, we're going to go get a book next to the Smoking Joe place. It's just, to me, that's.
I would just make one point about the only church that I'm aware of in the town center isn't a building owned by the city.
Right.
This city controls who leases space. If that's how you feel about them walking by a cannabis retail, I'm not sure how you'd feel about renting space to one. So my anticipation is that we are not going to get many applications in that building at all. Because in order to get an application, you have to get a consent form from the property owner that you can operate in that space, which would require action of this council in the first instance.
I'm kind of talking down the other direction, the Domino's, the Platinum Plumbing, and not that I'm definitely not scared of either one of those bringing, bad thoughts to a child, but, how far down, if you look at parking cars, just so they're not having to be forced to interact with the dispensary when they're going to service, or when they're going to the library. Parents shouldn't have to drive and park a mile away so they can take them through a narrow path, not to go by a dispensary.
I think one of the other things that might give you a little bit of comfort, council member, if you decide to do the first reading, is that all the qualified applicants will be required to come to a community meeting, give a presentation on their location, hear concerns of the community, and the city manager is authorized to add conditions to any permit that's issued to mitigate those. And so as the consultant, David McPherson from HDL mentioned, one of the things that HDL looks at specifically is the path of travel and the other adjacent businesses, and looks at, okay, if you're going to have your cannabis retailer at this location, here are the things that are next to you. What are you going to do to mitigate your effect on those adjacent businesses and operations? And that's going to be in a public setting where any member of the public's free to come in and voice those concerns.
For me, I think something needs to be put down. I mean, I get it. I get the 600, to be honest with you, it sounds like we're talking about 6,000 square feet or something. I mean, 600 feet's not that big of a deal in my opinion, even in something as small as the town center. But I resonate with Councilman Welty's point. Putting something in place shows that, we're at least representing the community of concern of churches, education, kids, that sort of stuff. So maybe a compromise with this council, maybe put 300 or 400 or something, showing that we're doing something.
Another idea, council member, is, so you have adjacent for school, daycare, youth center. There's nothing that prevents you from saying, okay, adjacent for these and 600 foot for this. Does that make sense?
Right.
Your buffer doesn't have to be the same for every single use. Now, it just means more work for Jim Morrissey when it's time to do.
And I'm not asking for that, I'm asking.
But you can do that.
And I don't think it needs to be that complex, at least my opinion. I mean, my colleagues, they can make that decision as well. But I think doing something as opposed to not doing anything shows that, at least for me personally, with some of the phone calls and messages that I've received from community members, putting something in place showing that this council cares about those facilities and about those particular stakeholders in our community. So I would suggest we do something like 300 or 400 or something along those lines. Again, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that many feet, so.
I kind of share Jeremy's
Okay. Hold on, I don't want people to talk over each other. Councilmember Dane?
Just a question. For someone who has no concept of how far anything is, can you give me an idea of what from the church, what would be 600, what business would be 600 feet from there? On the aisle with.
From the
with
church? You want me to walk it
or
off?
on the Domino's side.
It's gonna
Give me a
be,
second.
It'd be
it'll
like
be
little,
down,
like maybe Domino's?
down where the
Past
ceramic
down,
shop
600
is.
feet past down those. They're probably about 60 feet fronts, 5 stores down.
Yeah, you got Domino's, which you got the parking lot there, got the access, and then down. So you're gonna come down.
My guess
Who's
would
got
be-
the screen up?
You're gonna come down about where.
Tyler, is that you?
So I'm
Is that
showing.
you up on, you have the screens?
I'm showing.
A football field is 300 feet. A football field is 300 feet.
I would say we're about 600 feet from Pepe's right now.
Okay. Mayor, if you'd like me to answer, I'd be
Okay.
happy to.
You guys, sorry, can I please just ask everyone to kind of keep the formality of the meeting? I would appreciate it. We have a lot of people talking. No one's been called on. Okay, so, city attorney.
So I'm using Google Earth.
Thank you.
And using the measuring tool there. Measuring from the corner of the existing church, going 600 feet. It actually crosses the Central Park area and would go almost all the way across to the smoke and vape shop. So a 600-foot buffer would essentially take out half the town center.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's not, public comment time is over.
So to answer the question, it is parcel to parcel. And just looking at the map, a 600-foot buffer would generally take out about, because of the circle, you'd go to the I think even 600 feet would cover all the way to where we're standing right now. I'd say we were within 600 feet of the church. 300 feet, I think, would take about half of one of the buildings.
When the word adjacent was put in, does that mean directly across, or does that also mean catty corner?
That means the property lines are touching except for at a point. So if they touch at a point, that doesn't count.
Okay.
That is a fantastic question, thank you. I love it.
Well, we do have weird angles.
Yeah.
Okay. Does someone have a comment on that? You do. Okay, I'm going to recognize you and you can speak.
Not my turn.
It is your turn now.
It's my turn.
Yes.
Thank you. I think we're getting weighted down on distances. And I think Jeremy's right. Put something that's reasonable. I think we've got enough checks and balances in our system that we can not control, but at least regulate what comes in and what isn't going to come in. And I do think that with the addition of the school and the place of worship and other contingencies, if we want to put a foot, but if we're too restrictive, then we're out. We might as well just stop it right now and say, we're not going to move for cannabis in the city. But I think with the other things that we talked about, the conditional uses, the walkway paths, all the things that our consultant has said they'll do for us, I think that gives us another check in the system. So with the check and balances, it gives us the controls that we were asking for to make sure that the business that does come in, it fits our criteria. So I don't know whether we put 300 in or we just use some other wording that gives us the latitude to say no or yes.
Councilman Green, I agree with you 100%. This council's made the decision to move forward with the ordinance, so I wouldn't want to burden that by putting a footage. I say something along the lines of, 50 or 100, something that just shows the fact that we're protecting those zones, because I think some of the residents tonight brought up some really good points about the rehab center that we are blessed to be able to be part of, because there are tenants in one of our buildings. And I think if we do something that shows that we are, putting forth an ordinance that's protecting these establishments, and that number could be 20 feet, that number could be 50 feet, I would just strongly urge that we just put something down that's protecting them. And I think either 50 or 100, unless Councilman Welty has a different approach, but I think 50 or 100, now that our city attorney Googled how far it is, I'm glad it's not Pepe's, because I really would have lost my mind if Pepe's was 600 feet away, then I think we do something along the lines of 20 to 50 feet. I think that's fair when you're looking at what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think
Would someone like to venture a specific number we can enter into?
I can venture, I'll venture 50, and if that's okay. I would say 50 because as I look at the pathways, there's ways to, 50 feet gives you, if you're demanding that you want to walk down that pathway to the church, we need 600 feet.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a parent and you want to take your kid and not walk them by there, 50 feet is enough, so somebody with a little bit of intent won't bring their guy by, won't bring their children by. Again, you can come in the other way, so 50 should be at least a good place to start.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Cool.
And council members, just so you know how we'll put that in the revised ordinance, it would be to add it to 4.20250A2, we will add a D, which is religious facilities. We will add an E, which is libraries. And then we will change the word adjacent to it shall not be within 100 feet.
50 feet.
50 feet? Thank you. That's why we have all three of us here. 50 feet, And that's going to be measured parcel to parcel without regard for intervening structures.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Do we
What-
need action on that?
When we get into the area of security, we had talked about 24-hour security. We had points made by members of the community regarding the qualifications. Is that something that's part of the application process or that we can discuss at this point?
Security is absolutely in the ordinance in several locations.
Right?
And so, if that's something you want to look at, specifically about the security personnel, I believe it's on page 157 of your packet. And so the language requires armed and licensed security personnel on site 24 hours a day, licensed by the State of California Bureau of Security Investigative Services, subject to prior review and approval of the city manager and his or her designee, which approval shall not be unreasonably withheld. And then speaking to one of the public comment, or a couple of the public comments regarding what those security personnel would do, I would say that the city manager in our discussions, in his own research, we're very, I think it's good policy that security personnel are not simply sitting in the cannabis retail location. So if you go to page 158 and you look at near the middle of the page, number 6, part of the security plan requires that the licensed security personnel continuously monitor the parking lot and adjacent property to ensure that it's free of individuals who are loitering or causing a disturbance, and that it is cleared of employees and their vehicles one half hour after closing. So making sure that not only are they licensed by the state, they have been approved by the city manager, they are armed, and they are not just sitting inside the business. They are actively being outside.
Can we ask for more than one? Why wouldn't we ask for?
Well, I put personnel.
I know, but why can't we specify?
You can certainly specify. The idea here was to kick it over to Dave McPherson.
Well, and the reason why I'm asking is if we have someone patrolling the parking lot, which sounds great, they're not at the place of business.
Yes, so that's part of the condition terms that the city manager could be directed to do, which specifically can require 2. Typically what we see is there's 2 during operating hours and one that could be 24-hour, and or an additional would be where there's patrolling surveillance as well. So one's physically there, and then another one, that security company could be randomly doing security where they do multiple places, and that's the outside, so that kind of gives you a second person at night. But usually you have the 2 during the day where there's a range of hours before and after, and you could have one 24-hour. The cost of it is significant to require that.
I'm fine
For
with
2.
it being
For
very
2.
expensive.
For 2.
I think we need 2. And if it's very expensive for them, that's okay.
So are you okay with the idea of 2 during operating hours and 1 during closed hours?
Inventory is all put in a vault. Usually it's a 120-minute exposure to any vault, that even if someone robbed it, you'd have the whole sheriff's department there, even if they were delayed an hour to get there before someone would get anything out of that facility.
I'm not really concerned about property loss, to be honest. I'm more concerned about public safety. So,
Again, back to the 2 during the day versus the 2 at night. I think that's the
I'm just
clarification.
kind of like, how about 2 all the time?
But I love where you're going in regards to security, because that's mainly the big question, but also as a business component, I would take your advice. We don't want to not have applicants because we're requiring I know how much it costs to employ people, and it's very expensive. There's no cost on safety, obviously, but for people who are applying for this permit, have you seen, other cities require 2 security guards at all times? And if so, has it helped or hurt the application process?
So in California, in the last 7 years, there's only been 5 facilities that have been burglarized that did not meet the best practices in California, and none of them had security. For ones that actually had security at night during that period, plus also the septic by design, you can't even ram cars through there if you're properly designed for them, that with that 24-minute volt that someone can get access to, you could absolutely have no one there and someone couldn't rob it. The primary concern is public safety, right? That's why during the day, requiring two during the day during operating hours, or opening and closing where inventory is coming in and out, people are coming in and out, employees are coming in and out, is more essential during that time where statistically is a risk factor of just people going into parking lots where you're trying to reduce a liability or welfare to people.
Mayor, just my comments. They have a lot of cameras. If without the cameras, two would be absolutely, I would be right there. But they have a lot of cameras. They can station through a large part of the parking lot, and they have guns. So if there's something going on, they can pick it up on the camera. They can call the police, and they can do that. So that's really the plus. The question I would have in mind is, well, maybe they should have two until an hour after it closes.
I think that my concern is maybe not being communicated correctly. If the majority of the people who spoke out in public comment were concerned about who was going to be around the cannabis stores, they didn't specifically define when they were concerned about it. They were concerned about people either loitering or congregating or just generally being around in the area. And if we're trying to assuage the fears of the public, I would think that perhaps having more security presence as a deterrent would be something that we would be considering.
And Mayor, I would say during operating hours is where that's the biggest concern, 90% of it.
But the reason that it might be different in Canyon Lake is that we're not an industrial complex and we are in a strip mall, and that's kind of the location where we're going to potentially have this store is going to be next to bars that are open late at night, et cetera. So having the additional perk of uniformed security personnel in the parking lot, even if the store is closed, at the expense of the cannabis store, sounds like a good idea to me.
I guess my question is, are we asking the cannabis store security to patrol other issues besides the cannabis issues?
Answer should be no.
Well,
Pardon?
the parking lot.
So to answer that question, the ordinance calls for them to monitor the activity that's occurring at the premises and outside, prevent loitering and unlawful disturbances, and to serve as a visual deterrent to criminal activity. They're not a supplement for sheriff's deputies, so they're not out here to arrest people for committing general crimes, but they are certainly intended to be a deterrent to criminal activity with their physical presence.
Which is what we have the POA security doing, but we don't have them in the town center, so why not add that?
I would say, Mayor, that if that was an amendment that the council wanted to make, we can make it to 4.20.330, subsection D, which relates to armed and licensed security personnel. If you wanted to add a requirement that there shall be at least two on site 24 hours a day, you could do that. If you wanted to have two during operating hours and one the rest of the time, that would be another option as well. If you wanted to specifically say it, the minimum number. The other thing that I would point out is that we are going to be coming back with review criteria where the security plan will be implemented as part of that. We can certainly look at awarding additional points for additional security. And so that could certainly be part of the whether someone's qualified or not in the point process, as opposed to the ordinance side.
Right, that's kind of where I'm going with this, is if we're looking at not just how this works, but the community benefit. We pay a lot of money for POA security. I don't know why we wouldn't just add some security over in the town center.
Yeah. Madam Mayor, if I may. The question that I have is during the negotiation with some of these vendors, and I know that the amount of tax revenue that's paid to cities, would also requiring a second security guard at all times go into those negotiations on how much percentage the city could ask for. For instance, I know you gave the analogy of, I think it was 6, 8, all the way up to 10%. Would, in your professional opinion, would you see a lot of vendors say, well, since you're requiring me to have 2 security guards at all times, that the 8% or the 10%, that's not going to be a possibility. We're not going to be able to be cash flow positive on that, so therefore we can't meet that criteria, as opposed to having one security guard that's required and then being able to obtain 6, 8, or 10%.
Where they will look at bottom number. For
Right.
example, do you want minimum wage employers? Do you want employees that are getting medical benefits, vacation, health, all that other stuff? So they will look at that total cost to them and determine where they're going to pay for that cost. So if you demand more for something that may not have as not so much value, you may lose something where there's a significant value of other benefits to the community.
Because I do believe what you're saying, Madam Mayor, you're right on. My concern is, and most of the presentation, even from yourself, is that other cities, this is going to happen. And I think the cities like Menifee and others, will be a part of this, and therefore we're going to be taking business. I would hate for us not to bind ourselves and put heavy requirements to where we can't get a professional operation in our community. And that's the tough decision that we have to make, because we've never done this before.
Correct.
We've never been a part of this before. Canyon Lake has never even, been a part of this idea either. So being business friendly is a key component too, so that we get strong applicants, good applicants, to be a part of what we're doing, but at the same time, give the security that's necessary for Canyon Lake. So that would be my only concern is that if we make that criteria of 2 at all times, that the cost just might not make us applicable for good vendors to apply. So, I mean, you know the answer to that better than we do. You've been there, done that, or maybe you haven't. So, any insight on that particular scenario would really help.
Yeah, and I don't think vendor or any applicants can be concerned with the day, because that's actually in their best interest, because as the city attorney mentioned, is having someone patrolling the parking lots, looking others, take breaks, lunches and rotating people, addressing an issue without keeping the flow of people moving, so you don't have, lines outside the door and things of that nature. Having 2 is a good common practice that they will do and see value at it. It's the night when a store is closed, everything's locked up, you can run a tow truck through there and they're not walking away with anything. To have 2 people with armed guards is very expensive and not really a cost effective to them.
That's good information. Thank you. I didn't think of that.
Yes.
Mayor, maybe it's a compromise that, in my mind, my concern would be, till 2 o'clock on Friday and Saturday, and maybe till 10 o'clock during the week or something, if you wanted, when there's all this activity, these people going by and maybe sitting in front of the dispensary just because they like hanging out there because they're going to go walk down. I don't, most of the night, from midnight to basically 8 in the morning, it's really pretty dead. But there are periods after they close where there may be a risk, and that may be something to look at.
And that's maybe where that second person is a patrolling surveillance vehicle, which is not uncommon as well, where it's not locked to that second commitment, but Friday, Saturday, they may patrol that while the other one's already inside the store, where there's no inventory out of the facility, but he's not necessarily going to walk out there, go deal with something in the parking lot where they could have, someone brought by as a surveillance for that during that time you're talking about.
So we have to, excuse me.
No, did you have a?
I'm just trying to think how we're going to craft the security. Is that going to be a standalone piece to this that our consultant is going to have? And then?
Well, it depends here. So if you want to make an amendment to the ordinance, I'd recommend that you give direction. We can help craft that language. I think that you've certainly given your sense of what's a priority. And we're going to be bringing forward the review criteria at a subsequent meeting. And part of that will be the security plan and what we're looking for in it and what the points are in it. And so we can absolutely look at including some language about that there so people know that that's important and we want to see that. And then, the city manager does have the authority to have conditions on the permits. So if there's a need, he can absolutely add that. It's sort of the council's choice. Do you want to do this right now on the front end? My concern, just generally, is ordinances are much more difficult to change than resolutions are, than regulations are, or conditions on a permit.
I think a compromise would be what he said, 2 being the best practice during business hours. After that, points towards their security plan for qualification criteria.
Okay, do you want any of that to be in the ordinance, or are you content with that
Yes.
being?
Okay?
Okay, so then I would recommend that addition be in section 4.20.330 subdivision D. So it says armed and uniformed licensed security personnel be employed to monitor site activity, et cetera. I think we just add a sentence there that during operating hours, at least 2 such security personnel shall be employed by the operator. We might clean that language up just a little bit, but.
But still referencing 24-hour coverage.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
24-hour coverage, so just so we all know kind of why the ordinance is written the way it is, we, with this ordinance, are only authorizing retail, but we wrote the ordinance in such a way that should Canyon Lake expand in the future and get an industrial area or some other kind of area, and you wanted to add other uses, we wouldn't have to completely rewrite the whole thing. So there are general operating standards and there are retail-only operating standards. When the only use you're authorizing is retail, those things are both the same. So it does look a little duplicative at times, but it will still be 24 hours. But we would just simply be adding that requirement during operating hours, at least 2 personnel shall be on duty.
Okay. I did take note of Mr. Cousins' suggestion about not putting the full-on security plan in the ordinance.
Yes. Yeah.
Can we do that?
So that, again, we are going to be bringing the review criteria forward. One of the things that we do in the applications, if there are any portion of that application that the applicant believes should be confidential under the California Public Records Act, they need to submit it separately. And this is a huge pain. So Dave can explain how we actually do this so that we don't have to spend hours going through and redacting things for the Public Records Act.
Yeah, we have a paragraph in there that if there's anything they notify proprietary, you have to demonstrate it, but the Public Record Act just say that the interest is to the public than it is to the business. So anything that's proprietary, confidential, we clearly don't want someone knowing the floor plan design of cameras, but there are things as far as processes and POS and stuff that will not be confidential, and that's where they have to identify what will be considered for that does not violate the Public Records Act.
Okay.
And just so you know, the other thing that we oftentimes will see, one of the things that Dave and his group are going to be asking for is a business plan. Sometimes there are things that they consider trade secrets, that they don't want their competitors to know, their secret sauce to operating a cannabis retail establishment. So they are free to mark those as well. Now, the decision about whether it's public record and what is not is of the city, but those marks make our job a lot easier.
Okay. If I might just ask any of the other council members, I've kind of said what concerned me. I think Councilmember Welty went and described his concerns. Do you have any other specific concern, and we'll just go down the row?
I don't.
Okay, what about you?
No, I think it's.
You're good?
I'm good.
What about you, Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I got 73 of them. Just real quick. I do want to have the discussion amongst my colleagues about what, our good friend, Mr. Cook, had mentioned about having one or having multiple or 2 or 3 or 5 or 6. I think that's something that should be talked about because, that's a lot of questions that I've received from the public too. Are you planning on only bringing one store? Or are you planning on bringing multiple stores? So is this a good place to have that discussion?
Absolutely. I'd love to get some discussion and direction on that because we're going to have to bring a resolution forward setting the limit.
Correct.
So I'd like to get it right the first time.
And again, I apologize for the length of what we're doing tonight, but I think if we hash it out right now, it makes it a lot easier for the second reading. If you,
Please do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So,
Thanks for bringing that on, because I think the community size and the restrictions on locations is real narrow. I mean, we don't have a lot of latitude, but I also see when you do a single source one place, what it can lead. So I think we could go up to 2, but we may not have the space for 2 based on our other, but I think our size of community could do 2, because look at, Wildamar's got 3 on the books. They're not much bigger than us, but they have more open space as far as land. That way gives us latitude if we needed to go to a second one and there was a space that could be, and it fit the criteria, we would have that in place instead of having to go back and re-amend our documents to make that adjustment. That's just my observation.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Councilman Green, just in, creating an ordinance that makes sense for the future too. I don't know, I have concerns, just with the idea of one store and what that would create as far as the hostility in regards to the business side of it. And just even what that would put the pressure on our city manager on as well, with, making that one ultimate decision. So my concern is that, they brought to us a legitimate statistics in regard to 10,000 people, one store per. I know that Wildemar is almost up to 40,000 people, so they're, they got a buffer there of almost 10,000, which is why they did 3 stores as opposed to 4 stores. So I mean, I'm interested in the conversation. I think it's something that we should make a decision on, though.
I lean towards 1, but I don't want to shut the door on 2. That would be if we see that we get 1 and it works, then I'm really content. However, if we look at 2 and say, man, they're so close and the locations work, and I want the option for the city manager to move with that if he needs to, or he feels it's appropriate.
If I may, I think if that's the direction the council went, I would just ask for clarification at some point. If the council says, okay, we're going to allow 2, then we'll go through that scoring procedure, and then anyone who passes enters into negotiations. I'll just need to know if I'm being asked to negotiate the one best deal, or am asked at that time, or am I asked to negotiate the 2 best deals at that time? So
Right, that was my question. Can this be a staggered application process so that we can determine the viability of 1 before we commit to?
So before Dave goes, I'll let you know that how it's set up now, the city council sets the maximum number of permits. The application process determines who's qualified because they met the minimum threshold. The negotiations commence, and objective scoring is done about who has the highest and best community benefits. And the city manager issues the permit to the applicant with the highest and best community benefits. If there's more than 1, the way the ordinance is written, the city manager issues it to the highest and best, and then he issues it to the second highest and best. So in terms of, kind of being like, well, let's wait and see what we get, we're trying to prevent litigation against the city. That litigation occurs when we start exercising discretion that is difficult to back up. And so that's why we wrote it that way. If you wanted to issue 1, see how it went, and then reopen the application process in the future, you could absolutely do that. It's always easier to increase the number of licenses than it is to say, you know what, we issued too many, we want less, because people put in a lot of time and effort into those. So that would be my thoughts, and I'm sure Dave has some additional thoughts, because he's the one who actually does the application. I just watch.
Dave, real quick, just before I lose this point with our city attorney, because you brought up something important about issuing permits. We are talking about 1 location in the city of Canyon Lake, and that is the town center, right? We're not talking about issuing a permit for the town center, 1 for Eastport. We're talking about only issuing 1 permit for the town center by itself.
So we're talking about issuing 1 permit for a location that meets the criteria, which is C1 zoning and the sensitive use buffer of 50 feet that the council has directed be established.
So Eastport is still in the game.
So long as there is a parcel in Eastport that is at least 50 feet from the sensitive uses, it's in the game.
I might add to that, that there will be other considerations that are not mentioned in the ordinance, kind of our typical land use, zoning issues. So an application will go in, and our city planner, Jim Morrissey, will take a look at any number of things, including traffic flow, the availability of parking spaces, and those sorts of things, which may or may not make a location possible.
Right.
So, as the city manager mentioned, the regulatory ordinance is step one. You still have to go through the standard land use entitlement process. And so, I mean, I think that there's just a general concern about Eastport being available for any kind of high foot traffic retail. Like, it doesn't really matter what they're selling. It's just, it's not really designed for that level of traffic, I think is the concern.
Right.
I guess my comment is I prefer to deal with one problem and one permit. I'd rather deal with one problem than two, and if we have success with one, then we maybe look at it two. And I just think you put two out there and, well, you're treating me differently than the other one, and it just seems to be, could get messy. And as you say, we could always amend and add another one later. Just my comment, but you guys can do whatever you want to. I'm good.
We could take another straw poll, and people could say one or two.
Did you have feedback for us?
Yes, Mayor. So not knowing the number of universe of applicants you're going to get, right? Knowing that gives you a better assessment, one, where they lock their property up, and two, who they are and what their business model is and the issues with those. So you could end up three. It could be two here and one at the other location, or you might end up two over there or somewhere else. Surprise, somebody buys a piece of property that you weren't even aware of that could be eligible. Knowing that universe helps you make that decision that beyond the one, they say, we're doing one now, but now that we have an idea of what the universe looks like, you now have more sense of not having to guess, and then maybe the city manager might come back to recommending consideration of looking at another one versus hard coding it now or speculating of something that may never happen. You may end up with just one applicant, and it's all a moot point. But at least you have a better understanding that based on the application pool once you get it to make that determination.
I think that sounds sound.
Yeah.
I'd like to stay with the one.
Okay.
One.
One. Okay.
So wait, I'm still, that's one, I got 71 more. The only other one that I have, Madam Mayor, was Councilman Green brought this up, and I thought it was a good point, and I know it creates litigation, Mr. City Attorney. The whole striking conversation that, at any time, if we're not good with it, can you just shell that out a little bit for us, if that's something that
Sure.
we should put it in just because we can, or if we should
So
just-
it's already there.
Okay, can you outline it for us so we know?
Right.
What we're getting ourselves into with it, and if it's
Okay.
strong enough, if we need to.
Let me bring it up real fast. Okay. So I'm on page 143 of the packet, subdivision D, and I'll just read it slowly out loud so we don't have to page through it if we don't want to. The city's reservation of rights. The city reserves the right to reject any or all applications. Prior to permit issuance, the city may also modify, postpone, or cancel the application process or the entire program under this chapter at any time without liability, obligation, or commitment to any party, firm, organization, to the extent permitted under law. Persons submitting applications assume the risk that all or part of the program or any particular category of permit authorized under the chapter may be canceled prior to permit issuance. The city further reserves the right to request additional information from candidates submitting an application. The addition or to failure to comply with the requirements of the chapter, an application risks being rejected for the following reasons, including being late, not including the required elements, is not being considered fully responsive. So we did have that language in there. Most of that language is courtesy of our friends at HDL, who although I have done cannabis litigation, I'm certain that they have plenty of war stories to tell. You mentioned that we have the benefit of coming after the states of Colorado and Washington. And the first time I worked with HDL on a cannabis ordinance, I was introduced to their consultants who they'd actually hired directly from those states, from Colorado in particular, to work for them, to advise them on the regulatory ordinances. And I would say that you have the additional benefit of also coming after a lot of other cities. So, this ordinance includes a lot of hard-earned wisdom that was only earned after fighting those fights on previous application processes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm good.
What else?
I'm good.
I think good.
Do we need to do a motion?
You're
Yeah,
good?
so that take it up.
You're good?
I'm good.
Okay.
Let's go.
Okay. So what we are looking for is a motion and a second to approve the introduction and first reading as amended of ordinance 215, repealing chapter 9.03 of the Canyon Lake Municipal Code and adding chapter 4.20
That's a lot of numbers.
regarding commercial cannabis business.
Mayor, would you like me to read those amendments into the record at this point?
I think that would probably be just good for everyone's edification.
Okay, there were two amendments that I heard. One was to amend section 4.20.250A2 to increase the distance to sensitive uses from adjacent to 50 feet as measured from parcel to parcel in a direct line without regard for intervening structures, and to add to the sensitive uses both religious facilities and public libraries. The other amendment was to 4.20.330 subsection D to require at least two security personnel be on duty during operating hours of the retail facility.
Okay.
Okay.
Everyone good with that? Okay, so to that end, I need a motion and a second.
I make a motion for the first reading of ordinance number 215. And do I have to do the repealing of Municipal Code Section 9.03?
So it's a motion for all of it at once,
The
correct?
ordinance does both.
Okay.
It repeals chapter 9.03 and adds chapter 4.20.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion from Councilmember Green. I need a second.
Second.
Councilmember Dane. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Dane?
Aye.
Councilmember Green?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith?
This is weird. Aye.
Councilmember Walty?
Aye.
Mayor Castillo?
Aye.
Motion carried to approve the introduction and first reading of ordinance number 215, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Canyon Lake, California, repealing chapter 9.03 of the Canyon Lake Municipal Code and adding chapter 4.20 regarding commercial cannabis businesses, as amended.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for everyone who attended and your patience. Now, city manager comments.
Just one item from me and the city attorney, actually. Just a reminder that this is the last time this council will meet unless something crazy happens between now and the end of the month before the Brown Act goes back to the way it always was. And I'll let the city attorney kind of elaborate on what that means, but just kind of as a reminder of how things were and are about to be again.
Yes, as the city manager and I were just talking about upcoming meetings that we have, we realized that we have two council members who have only ever been council members during COVID when portions of the Brown Act are suspended, specifically the ability to teleconference. It's hard to describe how difficult it was to set up a teleconference before the pandemic arrived, requiring the posting of an agenda at least 72 hours in advance at the location where you were calling in from. The mayor is nodding her head because she attended the very first meeting that I ever attended with the mayor, involved her teleconferencing, and I think you had to post it, outside of a hotel lobby?
In the city of Delano.
In the city of Delano. That teleconference location had to be accessible to the public, so if you're calling in from your house, you have an agenda posted on your door, and anyone gets to come in if they want. Now, the legislature has apparently decided that that's kind of silly. So we do have, last check, I was talking with the city manager about this, AB 361, which is going to, with slight modifications, continue the ability to hold teleconferences, but the city council would have to make a finding on a monthly basis that social distancing and the state of emergency surrounding the pandemic continue to require the ability to have those portions of the Brown Act suspended. So it's something to keep in mind. If the city council wants to direct a resolution with those findings be placed on the next agenda so that you could continue to enjoy the flexibility of being able to call in to a city council meeting, please let us know. Otherwise, we are back to the original language of the Brown Act, and that means we're either here or we are going to be turning your living room into a public meeting space. Okay?
Anything else?
I would just say one more thing, Mayor. I know that we're all proud of ourselves for getting the first reading done and amending it. Should get several resolutions at the next meeting or the upcoming meeting. You're going to get a resolution establishing a whole bunch of fees for cannabis applications, cannabis appeals. You're going to get a resolution establishing the maximum number of retail establishments that you just get direction on. You're going to get a resolution establishing the application procedures and review criteria. So those are all going to be coming forward. I really think that the discussion you had today will make those items a lot easier to prepare and bring to you. But just don't be intimidated when you don't see just a second reading. You also get all the add-ons from our office.
Just lastly, Madam Mayor, I'd like to compliment the council. Really good work tonight. I mean, this has been a hot topic of discussion, probably the most controversial issue this council has taken up. And I can tell you, not all city councils can handle an issue like this as cordially as this council did, and as thoughtfully, and going through a lot of tricky, detailed issues with grace. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next regular meeting will be Wednesday, October 6th at 5 PM for closed session, 6:30 PM for open session. We are adjourned at 8:45.